Volume 8 exists. Though I've yet to make a video fully dedicated to Volume 8, I have mentioned my general thoughts in my Making Peace with RWBY video. The poor pacing, Cinder's pointless and unimaginative backstory, Ironwood's weird-ass writing, the excessive Oscar torture, the rushed and lackluster animation, the terrible writing, RWBY and the others just sitting in a manor doing nothing for most of the runtime, what they did to Penny, and John stealing the spotlight yet again, among other things. It's all a mess. And long story short, not a big fan.
Long story short, it was a bad time.
Just in general, it has been nice to let go of this need to defend the show and warp my perspective in whatever way I needed to claim it was good, not having to worry about validating other people's defenses of the show, and just being honest with how I feel. It feels so nice to let parasocial relationships go. And with that, I also wandered back into my old rewriting habit. These days I tend to keep more things private, including my overall series rewrite, but I thought maybe it would be fun to take Volume 8 on its own and try and make it into something, well, more to my tastes. Now, obligatory disclaimer, if you enjoyed Volume 8, this isn't to say that you're wrong or dumb for liking it. I'm glad you were able to have a good time. However, that does not give you the right to tell others who didn't enjoy it to be quiet when they're just sharing their own opinions. Now, before we continue, I do want to mention that my rewriting roots do come from fellow YouTuber Celtic Phoenix, whose Fixing RWBY series made me realize, wait, we can actually do that? I still need to catch up on his projects, but he's put so much work into that rewrite, including lovely new character designs, so I highly suggest you go check out the Fixing RWBY series. I also want to mention a recent RWBY video I made that's been kneecapped. I made a video detailing the issues with the Lost Fable, and Rooster Teeth wasn't the biggest fan. So much so they manually blocked it several times, forcing me to re-edit and re-upload it a couple times. As of right now, it seems to be fine, but if you could check it out after this video to give it some attention, it would be very much appreciated. And thank you to Twins Inc. and Judgmental Critter for boosting the video as well. And one final thing before we begin, many of you probably know of my friend Maxwell Media Inc., who did a full discussion about racism in RWBY with Fat Man Falling, helped me in writing and creating the White Fang video, and has corrupted me with superior music tastes and an appreciation for Fairy Tale. God, I love Urza. Oh god, I love Urza so much. Max and I started a collab video last year that was meant to be released in Black History Month, but technical difficulties in life being insane led to it only releasing a couple weeks ago, as of recording this. The idea behind the project is how white people often aren't exposed or don't consume media created and starring black people and people of color, which leads to this separation where, while marginalized people understand the culture of the majority, the reverse often isn't true. Like the fact everyone knows about Friends, but most white people don't know that just a year before it premiered, Living Single was also following 6 New Yorkers in their 20s and 30s trying to navigate adult life. Except Friends was the whitewashed version. Max introduced me to several shows including Moesha, Half and Half, Girlfriends, gotta love Girlfriends, Tony Childs for the win, and Pose. Oh, Pose, you deserved better. And the video follows us discussing each show in depth with our reactions and commentary, and how these shows speak to the eras and cultural phenomena surrounding them. It was such an honor to be involved in the project, and I hope you guys go check it out and show Max all the support because damn, he suffered putting that thing together. There was a cursed external hard drive involved in, oh god, or was it a no, I think it was a flash drive that was Basically, we had to re-record our audio several times for like every show, at least once. And oh god. But it's out. It's great. Go watch it. Now, with all that out of the way, I do have some notes that will apply to this rewrite. Given this is just a rewrite of Volume 8, we're going to be keeping within the canon of the first 7 volumes, albeit with some tweaks here and there. The largest changes have to do with two characters in particular, Clover and CL. Now, we all know how I feel about Clover and Crow's situation from my old Lucky Charms video. As much as I feel I was too kind to the writers in my Volume 7 review, that one section I still stand behind. The writing behind Clover's death was mind-boggling to begin with. Clover decides to target Crow rather than, I don't know, the serial killer when he gets loose. And then Crow decides to work with said serial killer? God, I was so confused by the situation writing it. I actually wrote Tyrion decides to work with a serial killer. So, like, that's wow. Just wow. It's a mess, not to mention the issues with members of RWBY teasing Lucky Charms when a lot of people were hoping for actual LGBT rep in the show rather than just supplemental content and one-off background characters. As such, Clover's death is being changed to a serious injury that's going to leave him bedridden for most of Volume 8. And though we will be touching on the baffling choices that we cannot erase, we're going to do our best to work it into most of he and Crow's character arcs and give them some much needed closure.
I don't need your closure.
CL, meanwhile, just vanished. If you don't recall, she showed up alongside Penny back in Volume 3. There was never any real purpose for her existence, which most of RWBY's cast understands well.
I forgot that you existed.
Still, given her existence is completely ignored during her absence in Atlas, and I do think there's potential to use her character well, we're going to act as though she was included during Volume 7 and will be joining us into Volume 8. Here, CL is actually Pietro's daughter, his biological daughter. CL is in her early 20s, meaning Pietro had her in his 40s, and her mother was the female scientist we see in the group photo. Part of why Pietro wanted to create Penny, aside from having a protector with a soul, was to give CL the sister she could never have. Something dead Disney mom. There's still the issue that Pietro, a black man, built a white girl by default, which we're not getting into that right now, but in an ideal world, white would not be the default. CL's initial coldness towards Penny is largely because she's never really seen her as a full human being, especially given Pietro gave up part of his aura to create her. But after the fall of Beacon and Penny was revived, they started to become closer as the two protectors of Mantle. CL has warmed up to Penny, and now she's trying to be a pillar of support, with Penny having the burden of the Winter Maiden power on her shoulders. We're also going to be cutting Cinder's pointless backstory because, well, for one, it's pointless. It's literally just Cinderella, but worse. Volume 8 is already so heavily focused on Salem's siege, we just don't have time to dedicate to Cinder's story, even though, in a way, she kind of comes across as the main character of Volume 8 from start to finish. Not to mention that this backstory shouldn't have taken so long to have been revealed. Like, why are we just learning about Cinder's story now after we already got Salem's? This could have gone into Volume 4 easily, with us seeing why Cinder joined Salem when it led her to becoming so weak and scarred. But we're not going to add it to Volume 4 retroactively. Instead, Cinder's backstory is going to be a part of Volume 9, for reasons which will become obvious once we reach the end of this rewrite. And finally, a note on the music, because the Volume 8 soundtrack is just not giving. The fact the Williams are expected to pump out a new album every single year with a certain number of tracks, while likely given little to no direction aside from a song about this character by Miles and Carey, explains why the soundtracks just aren't what they used to be, and likely why the Volume 8 soundtrack is taking longer than expected. They need a break. Some time to recharge and then come back when they have more ideas rather than trying to force out a bunch of new songs. So while we will be keeping the 6 new songs Volume 8 introduced, we will also be using other songs to give this volume the shine it deserves, namely from Casey's band OK Goodnight. Volume 8 actually did use their song Awake from their most recent EP Under the Veil, but it felt odd put to such a lackluster flashback fight. So we'll be using several songs from OK Goodnight throughout the volume, namely in the second half. Now, with all of that out of the way, are you ready for it? Our story begins much like the start of Volume 7, focusing on the auroras of the northern skies surrounding the shattered moon. I thought it'd be cool to tie in some lunar symbolism here, so right now it's in its waning crescent phase, which is a crescent surrounding broken chunks of the moon floating within. For reference, the waning crescent moon symbolizes reflection and surrender, which, given we're in the middle of a demon siege and characters are being made to reevaluate their choices, feels fitting. But the natural scenery is quickly overtaken by dark storm clouds. The grim horde takes center stage. Nevermore's manticores and flying bearing gulls soar through the squall, which is being generated by tempests, giant jellyfish like Grimm, whose tentacles generate electricity, which travel up towards the head to create storm clouds and, when provoked, lightning bolts. A small Atlas airship is trying to navigate the horde, zigzagging whenever Grimm get too close. Neo is the one piloting, and Cinder is pacing in the passenger cabin, rehearsing what she's going to tell Salem while she holds the lamp of knowledge. She's still in earshot of Neo though, which doesn't go well for Cinder when she mentions how she herself stole the lamp right out from under Ironwood. That one makes Neo jerk the steering wheel harder than before, causing Cinder to fall and nearly drop the lamp, and she's royally pissed when she sees Neo snickering. Now Cinder's not about to let herself be slighted, and it's here we see something kinda new from her that in a way was hinted at long before: command over the Grimm, both from her connection to Salem as well as her Grimm arm. She clenches her fist and we see her eyes glow yellow, which makes the eyes of one of the Terexes outside glow as well. This Terex dives at the airship, sitting right on the glass and screeching, which makes Neo panic, understandably. She tries to throw it, but it just won't budge. Fully amused, Cinder holds out her human hand, and we hear that classic screeching sound effect whenever Cinder uses her semblance. An orange light builds up within the Terex's stomach, and when Cinder snaps her fingers, it explodes, shaking the ship, breaking the windshield, and covering Neo in ash and Grimm residue. Waving her hand, Cinder quickly reassembles the broken glass to repair the windshield, then comments, "Torchwick was never this lousy a pilot, you know." Neo is clearly intimidated, which peaks when a deep bellow resounds through the airship. Cinder knows what this is. She directs Neo to fly directly through the storm cloud ahead, and when they come out the other side, it fully comes into sight. The Monstra. It's currently floating in place at the center of the horde, and Cinder comments how gaudy Salem's mode of transport is. Closing her eyes again, Cinder says, "We are here," and the whale bellows again. Now seemingly aware of where to go, Cinder directs Neo to the Grimm whale's side, where they land on what appears to be a heliport and hangar constructed from the Monstra's ribcage. Cinder's quick to hop out and make her way through the labyrinthine passages of gross Grimm flesh, all the while Neo just barely manages to keep up. They eventually reach a larger chamber which acts as a nexus, connecting smaller passages all around. This chamber, however, also serves another function, creating more Grimm for the horde. It's a bit of a spiral staircase situation, and in the center of the room reaching up to the ceiling is what looks to be a Grimm pool. This pod glows and pulses, then quickly opens to reveal a manticore, which is then dropped through a hole in the bottom of the floor to join the horde outside. Neo is absolutely disturbed by this, and when she moves to follow Cinder, she finds that Cinder has actually left her behind. Now this is an idea my friend Chris pitched a long while back, with Neo getting lost, so a lot of what follows regarding the villain's interactions are ideas he created that I am now embellishing upon. Thank you, Chris! With no idea of where to go, she retraces her steps back out to the launch pad. At this point, she's ready to hop into the airship and peace the fuck out, only for a huge Nevermore to crash through the place and send the airship falling thousands of feet. On the back of the Nevermore is Tyrion, digging the blades of his weapons into the back of the Nevermore's neck, and thanking it for the ride before it dissolves, letting out a final screech of pain. Tyrion, of course, has no idea as to who Neo is. To his knowledge, this is an intruder in his goddess domain who is just trying to escape, and he ain't about to let any potential enemy get away and live to tell the tale. Tyrion lunges at Neo, and Neo uses her semblance to break apart before running. Only problem is there's nowhere to run. Tyrion's also a skilled fighter and sharpened serial killer, so he's able to pick up on Neo's illusion semblance quickly, commenting on what a shame it's going to be to kill someone with such a vivid imagination. This commotion has drawn quite a bit of attention. Hazel arrives to check on what's going on, and when Tyrion informs him of their alleged intruder, Hazel cracks his knuckles, ready to do away with Neo. Neo dodges as they charge, but when she looks back expecting them to follow, she notices they seem to be attacking nothing, almost as if she were an invisible foe before them. Emerald calls out to Neo, clearly using her semblance on both Hazel and Tyrion. Emerald asks if she's okay, which confuses Neo, given she's been receiving nothing but murder attempts since the moment she arrived, but Emerald seems sincere, even more so when she has to pull back her hallucinations as she feels a headache coming on, to which Hazel and Tyrion are quick to question Emerald's loyalty. Emerald explains that Neo was a part of Cinder's team back at Beacon, and she can be trusted, to which Tyrion notes that in this place, trust matters very little compared to devotion to their master. We fight a bit more cause this is RWBY and that's how we work out our conflicts, but right as shit gets most tense, a whistle cuts through the fight. Blasts of wind break them up, and we see a small tornado at the end of the passage which unleashes a final barrage. When the dust clears, Mercury rushes through and knocks Emerald and Neo to their feet, only to yell at Hazel and Tyrion to back off, as Salem can use all the help she can get right now. Emerald snaps at Mercury, but Mercury tells Emerald not to shoot the messenger before the whale violently shakes with another bellow. He says, "We all know better than to keep her waiting," as he tosses on his duffel bag. Emerald asks what's in the bag, and Mercury just says it's an old trinket of Salem she told him to grab ahead of time. They follow Mercury into the bridge at the front of the whale. Salem's throne, crafted from bone, sits at the center, right in the middle of the monstrous skull, from which the entirety of Atlas is visible. Cinder is currently explaining her story to Salem, who's seated at present and unseen by the audience. This visibly pisses Neo off, but right then Emerald runs up to Cinder, tears in her eyes and expressing how she knew she was alive the whole time. Cinder's not quite excited to see Emerald though, silencing her with but a scornful glare. Neo definitely feels for Emerald, but her fear returns when Salem asks the newcomer be brought before her. Tyrion pushes her ahead with his stinger, and it's through Neo's eyes we see Salem sitting atop her throne, looking upon her dispassionately. Salem asks she introduce herself, but quickly catches on to Neo being mute, at which point Salem initiates a conversation using sign language, even snickering about comments clearly about Cinder, whose meanings she can only guess aren't too favorable. Especially when Salem says, "I may be gaudy, but at least I don't need lies to win people's trust." Salem asks Neo about her abilities, to which she shows off her semblance by playing little tricks on Cinder, Hazel, Tyrion, and Mercury, much to Emerald's amusement. This impresses Salem, who then inquires as to Neo's motivations, to which Cinder cuts in about her wanting to avenge Roman Torchwick by killing Ruby Rose, clearly trying to sabotage Neo, given Salem has routinely stated she wants Ruby alive. But that's not why Neo is pissed off, and Salem, given her grim nature, is able to tell, reading that she doesn't see much merit in that interpretation. In any case, Salem sees a potential ally in Neapolitan, and makes her an offer that Neo pledge herself to Salem, and once she uses the power of the relics to transform Remnant into a world of her own making, she will personally see to it that Roman and Neo are reunited for all time. Neo is clearly taken aback at this promise and unsure of how to respond. When she asks about the oaths, Salem explains that all her followers pledge themselves to her, protecting them from the Grim, directing her to reveal her emblem, which flashes on the other villains' necks when Salem gestures to them. Tyrion notes the Grim protection depends on how pleased Salem is with you at the moment, which Salem will elaborate on. Neo is unsure, but Salem is surprisingly lenient. She knows that pressuring someone into following her is only going to give her a paranoid, half-hearted servant, and as such, she prefers the oath being sincere. She gives Neo time to think it over, but also gives a warning. "If you leave, know that when I next find you, and I will find you, I expect an answer." With this out of the way, we move on to more pressing matters, harnessing the lamp's power. The only issue is she doesn't know how to activate it, but Ozma does. Cinder's ready to go out hunting, but Salem stops her. Instead, she proposes this as the perfect moment to test out a new experiment she's had in the works. She hands Cinder the lamp, then instructs her to stand at the edge of the bridge while everyone stays far away. Once this is done, Salem's eyes glow yellow like Cinder's did, and she says, Fetch. Right on cue, we hear distant footsteps growing louder, followed by panting. The Hound bursts through the door, past everyone else and charging right at Cinder. She tries to defend herself with magic, but the Hound is unrelenting, eventually knocking Cinder to the ground and wresting the lamp from her, bringing it to Salem in its teeth, to which Salem goes, "Good boy," as any loving dog owner would. The Hound is going to handle this objective personally. Mercury opens the duffel bag and pulls out Ozma's staff, the one from the Lost Fable, and presents it to Salem, who in turn has the Hound sniff it. She tells the Hound to bring Ozma to her, and on command, the Hound sprouts wings and dives off the bridge. Smiling, Salem then tells everyone to sit back and relax as the show is about to begin. We then cut to the city of Mantle, where people are panicking at the sight of the Grim Horde in the distance. Some people are still at the loading zones, waiting for airships to take them to Atlas, while others are running for the crater. It doesn't look like the Atlas military is going to be of any help anytime soon. And up in the airship, the kids take notice. As a recap of who's in the airship, given the size of this damn cast, we have the same crew from the end of Volume 7. Teams RWBY and Junior, Penny, CL, Pietro, and Maria. Where's Oscar, you ask? We'll get there soon. Right now, everybody's high on stress given Ironwood's turned against them. Salem is here, and Mantle's right in her path, and the lamp is in her hands. Ren specifically proposes they bring Penny to Ironwood, and maybe they can convince him to use the staff to somehow save both Mantle and Atlas. Team RWBY is especially against this, given they witnessed firsthand the coldness and Ironwood's choice to leave Mantle behind. Weiss does suggest they take the staff and use it for defensive purposes, while Yang proposes using it to attack Salem's forces directly, only for Blake to crush both their dreams at once by reminding them they have no clue how the staff works. The only one who does is Oz. That especially makes RWBY worried, and she suggests they try and find both Oscar and Crow before they plan their next move. But Yang insists there's no time, and Salem's not just gonna wait for them to figure out what to do, and they have to act now. Maria, fed up with flying around in circles, asks where they're actually headed, to which everyone gives different answers, and it becomes a shouting match, and this visibly upsets Penny. Pietro takes note, but it's CL who holds Penny's hand to comfort her, and RWBY tells everyone to shut up. Now that Penny's the Winter Maiden, it should be her choice what they do next, and so they all look to her and await an answer, to which she's unsure how to respond. Before she can even think, a deafening bellow crashes through all their eardrums. It's the monstrous call, almost like a demonic version of a whale song, reverberating all across Mantle, catching them off guard and even making the earth tremble. They turn their attention to the Grim Whale, and though it's not coming any closer, the Grim Horde around it is a different story. They, along with lots of land-based Grimm, are charging right for Mantle. So now the immediate goal is to keep the Grimm from reaching Mantle. Penny's the first one to try and step up, but Pietro stops her. Though her magic could be helpful against the Grimm, having her out in the open displaying that magic could risk either Salem or Ironwood's forces closing in to capture her during the frenzy. Hesitantly, RWBY agrees, but tries to insist they've got things handled, and Penny yields. Maria asks how the kids plan on handling this without Penny's firepower to back them up, especially given the high number of Grimm. But looking to Jean and Weiss, RWBY says she has an idea. They hover over the tundra as the Grimm draw closer, and the door opens to reveal Weiss preparing a summon glyph as Jean boosts her aura. Dozens of summons, Armagigases, Borbatusks, Queen Lancers, and Nevermores appear and charge at the Grimm, after which the kids implement their world-famous landing strategies, possibly while playing a little game of who can kill the most Grimm. Plus RWBY telling Weiss summons don't count, and when Weiss is upset as to why, Blake and Yang both answer, it's cheating. Meanwhile, in the slums, Oscar finds everyone taking shelter as Monstra bellows in the distance. Oscar looks to the airships around Atlas, but when Ozpin comments on how they can't count on James being of any help, Oscar snaps that he already knows that. There's clear tension between Oscar and Ozpin still, but that'll have to wait. Oscar is certain RWBY and the others escaped and are fighting the Grimm, and they're going to need all the help that they can get. Oscar does try to lighten the mood with a joke about a crash course in using Ozpin's magic, which actually makes Oz a bit more nervous. Oscar inquires, and Ozpin admits that because his magic, however little is left, comes from Ozma's original soul, using magic expedites the speed at which their souls will merge. Oscar's clearly terrified, especially given he just used magic to survive a several thousand foot airborne drop. then takes a jab at how he wishes Oz made his cane into a gun before setting off for the battle. We then cut to Ironwood's office, where his gaze remains focused not on the Grim headed for Mantle, but Monstra, looming menacingly in the distance. He thinks back to what he did to Oscar, then looks at his hand. The sound of the gunshot echoes in his head, and he quietly asks himself, "What have I done?" The Aesops, still licking their wounds, stand at attention and await orders. One of the airships reports to Ironwood what's going on below and asks if they should intervene, but before they can even finish, Ironwood demands the fleet stay put. He's afraid that if even one ship moves out of place, Salem's whale will take advantage of that vulnerability and close in immediately. Marrow's clearly worried about Mantle and even raises that point. Vine counters, saying that because the staff is here in Atlas, Salem's assault on Mantle is merely an attempt to create an opening in Atlas, just like it was with Watts and Tyrion. Elm posits the idea that the Winter Maiden, reluctantly saying Penny's name, is probably down in Mantle helping Ruby's team, at which Harriet's excited at the idea of heading down there themselves and tossing them in jail alongside that attempted murderer. Ironwood hears what they're all saying and admits he hates the idea of leaving Mantle behind, but this is just how things are. In his mind, the attempt to save Mantle is going to doom all of Remnant. He's essentially viewing his actions as damage control and harm reduction. And now we finally return to the action. Teams Ruby and Junior kicking ass out in the tundra, kinda like we see in the Volume 8 intro, alongside a bunch of Weiss summons. Now, I want to say I'm no expert on choreography. A lot of what I'm doing here is laying out the outline of events, which in my mind would then be translated into action by people who know what they're doing in that realm. As such, I'm probably not going to be specific on the detailed actions within fights unless there's a specific visual I have in mind that's also linked to the story, or if there's a specific arc or character dynamic involved that I would want portrayed through said fight. The main thread I want to explore through this fight, though, is how endless the Grim Horde is. Every time it seems one of the characters has wiped out a dozen Grim, another 2 or 3 dozen come their way, and they're all still clearly exhausted from the last 24 hours. To add to this atmosphere of, oh shit, this is not what we thought it was, we also get our first insert song of the volume, and it's from OK Goodnight. Think Again. We also get hints at character dynamics we'll be exploring the rest of the volume, beginning with Ren and Nora. Nora is able to handle herself fine, but the moment it seems she might be overwhelmed, Ren jumps in and steals her thunder, much to Nora's annoyance. He's incredibly overprotective and doesn't seem to trust Nora's ability to handle herself. Team RWBY, meanwhile, is spread a bit thin. Some Grim nearly get past RWBY, and she yells at Yang, who's way up front, to get to the flank and handle any Grim who make it past. Yang barks back that she's the best fighter of their group, so she needs to stay at the front to lessen the burden for the others. She also tells RWBY, just use your silver eyes on them, to which RWBY goes, it's kinda hard to channel your love and compassion in the middle of a fight. Dismissing RWBY's rebuttal, Yang flies even further into the Horde to kick ass, frustrating RWBY and forcing Weiss to follow RWBY's orders despite her exhaustion. When RWBY tells Blake to help Weiss, Yang winds up shouting for Blake that she needs backup. Blake is confused and ultimately goes to help Yang, and RWBY's just like, the fuck am I even leader for? Penny watches the fights from the airship, wishing she could fly down and help her friends, but Pietro insists this is for the best. Unfortunately, Penny's not exactly convinced of this when she sees a bunch of Grim making it past the others' line of defense and getting closer to the city, along with aerial Grim closing in on Mantle. It's clear she wants to join the fight. Pietro asks Penny if she's about to do just that, and when Penny says no, she hiccups. Bringing back the whole Penny hiccups when she lies thingy? Yes, we are. When Pietro asks Ciel to keep Penny from doing anything reckless, Ciel responds, of course, father, before winking at Penny. Penny smiles, goes full maiden eyes, and the sisters leap out of the ship to kick ass while Pietro loses his mind, and Maria cackles as she goes, that's my girls. We stand Maria as best chaotic good stepmom. Unfortunately, Penny's unsure of how the maiden power even works. Though her usual robot powers kick ass, whenever she attempts to use elemental magic, it backfires and often creates more problems than it fixes. RWBY's about to chastise Penny for her actions, but instead directs her and Ciel to go help Yang, while she focuses on making sure no Grim have entered Mantle. Right on cue, Oscar finally arrives at the hole in Mantle's wall, and the two make eye contact. Keep in mind, they haven't seen each other since they parted ways at Schnee Manor. They excitedly run towards each other, but before they reunite, the Hound flies in and strikes Oscar. It thrashes him about. RWBY uses her semblance to rush in and protect Oscar, but the Hound adapts quickly, able to predict RWBY's movements and quickly dispatch her, especially when it tosses her scythe across the tundra. She focuses and does manage to use her silver eyes, which initially seems to work as the Hound stumbles and groans in pain. It doesn't last long, though, as the Hound inexplicably recovers and mutates into its more humanoid form. In the midst of RWBY and Oscar's confusion, it charges again, knocking RWBY out of the way and grabbing Oscar before flying away towards Monstra. RWBY cries out for the others to save Oscar, and though everyone can clearly see him being taken, the Hound lets out a howl. And almost as if on command, the Grimm strategically overwhelm everyone to keep them from saving him. Penny tries to focus her laser on the Hound, but the Hound takes notice and uses Oscar as a shield, and as Penny hesitates, she's swarmed by Nevermores and Flying Barangles and knocked out of the way. It's clear our characters have been pushed to their limits. RWBY gets real pissed, grabs her scythe, and goes to town slaughtering Grimm after Grimm in rage. But right as a huge-ass Ursa Major is about to charge at her, it stops. All the Grimm stop, then retreat back to the mountains without explanation. Everyone is confused, but right as RWBY's about ready to chase them down, the whale bellows again, deafening everyone and shaking the ground. To make matters weirder, Monstra opens its jaws, and a flood of Grimm ichor pours out. That's right, the flying whale is vomiting forth an ichor waterfall. That's when a disembodied voice reverberates all across both Mantle and Atlas. Salem, using Monstra to project her voice from the bridge. And she's here to make some demands. Good morning, people of Atlas and Mantle. You may have heard of me from your beloved General Ironwood, but to clarify, my name is Salem, known to you as the Queen of the Grimm. Now I know that immediately filled most of you with panic, but rest assured I am not here for wanton bloodshed. No, I'm here because your dear General, along with the headmasters of your huntsman academies, have been lying to you. They've kept you as mindless sheep to hoard power for themselves, and used your children as disposable shields, all to hold on to what is rightfully mine. And alas, your fates rest in your general's hands. To James specifically, I already have the Lamp of Knowledge in my possession, along with the parasite of a ringleader you call Ozpin. Now I simply request 3 things: the Winter Maiden, the Staff of Creation, and Ruby Rose. If all 3 items are not turned over to me by midnight, I will have no choice but to take Mantle as collateral. The Grimm Horde you just witnessed is but a taste of what my forces are capable of. They will raze Mantle to the ground and leave nothing left but ash and death. And after that, you'll have till sunrise before Atlas falls from the sky. I trust you'll make the right decision for your people, James. You always do. During this message, we get everyone's reactions. The heroes, Ironwood's forces, and Salem's own minions. It's clear Salem's not fucking around. This fight has left RWBY and her friends exhausted, and things are only going to get worse from here. RWBY looks back and picks up Ozpin's cane, which Oscar dropped in the struggle, and she glares at Monstra. And of course, cue the intro! Same song, generally same vibes, I don't have many notes here. But there you go, an action-packed premiere that establishes the stakes and sets up lots of character arcs and dynamics to come in the rest of the volume. We start on black. Eerie music begins to play, and Ozpin's disembodied voice calls to Oscar. As Oscar stirs, we see we're in his perspective, looking down as his feet are suspended over the floor. Ozpin says, "Don't panic, we're going to be okay." And Oscar looks up to see a silhouette leaning against the doorway, playing with a bright red flame in its hand. My long-lost Ozma, found at last. Yep, we're opening on the scene where Salem and Oscar first meet, where Oscar is currently being dangled from the Hound's teeth. But things take a bit of a turn as Salem corrects herself, apologizing given she's obviously addressing the current Oz rather than Ozpin, or whatever contrived Oz name it is this time. Oscar is clearly unsure of what the fuck is going on, but Salem continues her courteous facade, asking for the boy's name. He doesn't answer, but this doesn't upset Salem. Instead, she figures it makes sense how untrusting Oscar is, given her method of bringing him here, and all he's probably heard of her thus far are likely not too favorable. As an act of good faith, she gestures to the hound to gently put Oscar on the ground. Oscar does comply and say his name, and Salem says it's nice to meet him. She wants to have a little chat as they get to know each other, and so she focuses her magic to craft 2 chairs for each of them from monstrous bones. Hesitantly, Oscar seats himself, and Salem asks where he's from. Oscar pauses, waiting for Oz's input, but Oz stays silent. Salem notes this and tells Oscar to speak freely. Oscar says he's from a small farm just outside of Mistral, and Salem asks about his experiences, which eventually turns to how Oscar left his family behind once Oz had appeared and explained his mission. Salem notes how much Oscar seems to miss home and asks him why he left for such a dangerous mission because of some mysterious disembodied voice. Oscar says it's to save the world, because from all he's seen, Salem wants to destroy it. Salem simply laughs, dismissing such notions as lies woven by Oz over his many lifetimes. Ozpin immediately takes the reins and tells Salem off, to which Salem's only response is, "I don't believe I was talking to you, Oz." Oscar demands he be put back in control, but Ozpin refuses, saying it's too dangerous and Salem's only manipulating him. Salem concludes there's no point in continuing a dead-end conversation with Oz, so she leaves the hound to keep Oscar company while she attends to urgent matters. Once she leaves, Oscar takes back control. Ozpin is surprised, but Oscar simply tells Oz to never do that again. It's a bit awkward though, with the hound sitting in the corner. Maybe there could be a little moment with the hound wanting the back of the ear scratched, and it scarily growls until Oscar goes along, and Ozpin just quietly goes, "I was always more of a cat person," as Oscar is silently like, "It's not really a time for jokes." We then cut to the bridge where the other villains await, mostly trying to kill time. Emerald and Neo are sitting off in their own little corner bonding, namely comparing their semblances through cute visual gags. One of them, though, is Neo taking a jab at Cinder, and Emerald tells Neo to quit it before Cinder sees. Neo is annoyed, but decides to inquire as to why Emerald is so loyal to Cinder, to which Emerald explains her past. Emerald never knew her parents, as they'd given her up when she was born, leaving her to grow up in a run-down, overcrowded orphanage in the slums of Vale. Emerald would often steal extra food for herself, and even did so for the other kids to impress them. This eventually escalated into stealing money from some of the staff, which eventually got her busted, and the friends she expected to take the fall for her, or stand up for her, just sold her down the river. Given she was 16 at the time, she was simply thrown out and expected to make it on her own. Not long after this, she discovered her semblance, and that's when Cinder found her. Cinder taught Emerald how to hone her semblance, and with Cinder, Emerald finally felt appreciated. Neo seems to get where Cinder's coming from and confirms her similar background when Emerald asks. Emerald also asks if Neo loved Roman, but then goes, "No, I mean like romantically," to which Neo raises an eyebrow and shakes her head no. Emerald winds up admitting she does love Cinder that way because of all she's done for her, but rationalizes Cinder's behavior and lack of affection by how stressed she's been trying to please Salem. In Emerald's mind, Cinder will go back to how she was when they first met, once Salem remakes the world or whatever. But Neo ain't so sure. They turn their attention over to Cinder, who's, of course, fiddling with a knife she made from glass, talking about how she should have been put in charge of interrogating Ozpin. After all, she killed him at Beacon, so he would naturally be terrified of what she's capable of. Mercury just laughs, saying that doe-eyed little farmhand wouldn't even be scared of her. And Tyrion, who's currently hanging upside down from the sinew along the ceiling, it helps him meditate, can't help but join in. He claims Salem always focuses on the big picture rather than giving into her impulses. That is the key difference that makes Salem their queen and Cinder another pawn. Hazel steps in and lectures Cinder a bit too on her needless cruelty. He believes Ozpin would likely just let Oscar take the brunt of the torture, and at that point Oscar would say whatever he thinks they'd want to hear to make it stop. Cinder finds that rich, given she could hear the chaos Hazel was causing back at Haven when he realized Oscar was the next Oz. And he's probably the most eager to pummel Ozpin bloody out of all of them. Hazel says he's only trying to seek justice against a man he views as a monster, not to hurt innocent children, to which literally everyone else laughs, because it's like, dude, look where you're at. Read the room made of hell blubber and demon whalebone filled with criminals, murderers, and Dark Lord wannabe. Salem breaks up the chatter as she arrives. Cinder immediately asks if she can go find the Winter Maiden, but Salem shoots her dream in its last good eye. The entire point of her ultimatum was because she knows how paranoid James is. By imposing a deadline, she can exploit his desperation by making it 10 times worse. So either he winds up doing her job for her and getting everything she wants in one place, or she can at least have him wear both his forces and RWBY's team down enough to where they won't be able to put up a fight. In the meantime, though, they need to make sure the Grim Horde is ready for midnight, to which Salem mentions she has a mission for Hazel, Tyrion, and Mercury. The Ichor Monstra barfed up last episode has created a massive pool for Grim creation in the mountains, but that alone won't be enough to overwhelm an entire city. She needs it to move towards the city on its own, to which she reveals a small red, black, and yellow capsule, almost like a Grim egg. She spent many eons experimenting on creating new Grim, and this is a recent one. The Hellbrine. Once the capsule is dropped in any body of water, or in this case an Ichor pool, it'll dissolve and release several small, shrimp-like Grim. These Grim will rapidly multiply, taking over their environment and giving rise to many more Grim as they direct the flow of Ichor towards a potential target. In this case, a city filled with terrified residents. Now, Hazel, Tyrion, and Mercury are being sent to drop the capsule into the pool, after which the Hellbrine will transform it into a massive river of Grim headed straight for Mantle. It's clear the idea unnerves everyone, except Tyrion, of course. He just congratulates Salem on her ingenuity because he's a shameless Salem stan. Back down in Mantle, meanwhile, RWBY and the others are gathered in the crater recovering from their fight, and shit is tense. Even more tense as May enters and tells them all to check out the news on their scrolls. Ironwood himself is speaking via the Atlas broadcast network, and his arm is out of its sling and behind his back. He asks RWBY, Penny, and Pietro to turn themselves in. He's not planning on turning them over to Salem, but he does need their help in order to save Atlas. It's also here he admits something that Judgmental Critter actually proposed in her Volume 8 review, which is great, you should go watch it. Ironwood actually tries to appeal to Penny as the protector of Mantle, saying that he's had his team working tirelessly to try and fight back against Watt's virus to get the heating grid in both the city of Mantle itself as well as the crater back on. But they've had no luck. He's hoping Pietro might be able to help and even asks him directly, and Pietro just shakes his head, scoffing at the idea James suddenly seems to care about a city he was ready to leave for dead. Ironwood claims he's willing to work with them to save Mantle, but no one believes he'll follow through given his actions. However, Ironwood also admits that he has Crow and Robin in custody, with Crow being held on suspicion of the attempted murder of Clover. Ironwood doesn't intend to hurt them, but he does hope it'll bring RWBY out of the woodwork. He also speaks to Weiss directly, saying he's holding her mother and brother in custody as well on suspicion of collusion, either with Jacques or with her. It's kinda obvious he's baiting them into coming to Atlas so that he can capture them, but RWBY and Weiss panic on what Ironwood might be capable of, and Weiss is baffled as to how Winter could have allowed this. Though the Happy Huntresses are currently helping move all of Mantle's citizens into the crater before midnight, May is adamant about going to save Robin. This sparks conflict among the kids as to what they should do. Though Blake, Jean, and Nora sympathize with RWBY and Weiss' fear, they also know a foolhardy rescue attempt in what's obviously a trap is a waste of time. Right now, Mantle needs all the help it can get for what's headed its way. RWBY tells Yang that their uncle needs them, to which Yang disagrees. She's certain Crow can handle himself, and more importantly, she feels that they should be taking the fight to Salem, the root of all this division. Even if they can't kill her, they can at least try and put a dent in her forces to buy themselves time, and maybe even get Ironwood off their backs for a while. Not to mention, Oscar's most likely being held prisoner by Salem, and who knows what she might do to him. The sooner they can take Salem down, the more likely they'll be able to save Oscar. RWBY wants to help Mantle too, but she also reminds everyone of the Amity project. If they can get the tower up and running, they'll be able to restore the global CCTS, send out a message, and get help from the other kingdoms to turn the tides. The others aren't certain as to whether that'll do what RWBY hopes it will, with Weiss being the only real pillar of support. Pietro actually does say Amity is close to being finished, and he's keen to let the other kingdoms handle this mess for them. He'll just need the launch codes from the military's databases, and RWBY suggests they kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Sneak into the compound to get the launch codes, and break out Crow, Robin, and the Schnees. Penny suggests she help, but Pietro shoots that down and says it's too dangerous for her to go anywhere near Ironwood. Surprisingly, Ren is on board for the Amity idea, which really takes everyone aback. Nora asks about Mantle, but Ren says he's able to focus on the big picture, which Nora takes as a personal jab. This leads to even more arguments, all the while Blake is keeping to herself and unsure of how to feel. Yang asks Blake for backup on how reckless RWBY's idea is, and she hesitantly agrees, to which RWBY asks about Gear's new White Fang possibly being able to help, while Weiss takes a jab at Blake's priority of following Yang's lead instead of thinking for herself. More arguments flare up, and Blake flies into a quiet anxiety, thinking to herself how she's not even sure about what she's doing, and how she wishes she could just disappear. Suddenly, everyone's voices become muffled, and the world goes dark, and everyone becomes nothing more than a shadowy silhouette. Blake is confused as to what's happening and calls out, but no one seems to hear her. Her heart thumps, she holds her forehead, and she quietly goes, "Not again." Yang asks for Blake several times, though it takes a few moments for her to register for Blake. She can see the others are looking around for her, and as she collects her breath, everything returns to normal. They ask where Blake just went, but Blake dismisses it, saying it's nothing. Everyone moves on, but it's clear something is up with Blake's semblance. With everything said, the group decides to split up. RWBY, Weiss, and Ren will go with May to get the Amity launch codes and rescue Crow and the others. Penny, CL, Pietro, and Maria will await them at Amity while getting the tower ready. Yang, Blake, Jean, and Nora will remain in Mantle with Fiona and Joanna to help with evacuations. Up in Atlas, meanwhile, we see Ironwood after he's finished the broadcast. And we also get a better look at his new prosthetic arm. He checks his scroll to call Pietro again, with no luck, and we see he's been calling Pietro non-stop for hours. He then checks in with Harriet, who's leading efforts with the other Aesops to evacuate all of Atlas citizens into the subway tunnels in case Salem heads right for the city. After the status report, Ironwood tells her of Clover's condition. The doctors have been working all night since they got him onto the airship after pickup, and now have managed to stabilize him, and it should only be a few more hours until he enters recovery. In any case, he's not going to be combat ready anytime soon. Harriet asks about Winter, and right on cue, Winter yells at Ironwood from down the hall, and Ironwood ends the call. Winter is mostly recovered as well, with prosthetics to support herself, and she is pissed. Mostly because she's just learned of Willow and Whitley's imprisonment. James swears that the last thing he wants to do is hurt anyone. This is merely a precautionary measure. Though when Ironwood admits he's nervous about Winter potentially turning on him as well, Winter immediately backs down. Ironwood does apologize and asks if she'd like to speak with her family in the military prison while he attends to other matters. The military prison is rather large, with a wide open main room filled with lunchroom tables and a kitchen. Unfortunately, no one's able to really use this common area given all the prisoners are stuck in their cells behind hard light barriers. Crow, Robin, Jacques, Whitley, Willow, and Watts. They can't see each other, but they can all hear each other, which makes it easy for them to all grumble amongst themselves. Except Watts and Crow though, as Watts is just trying to get some shut-eye while Crow can't help but stare endlessly at Clover's bloody pendant. Oh, also the cells all have windows for natural light, namely all providing a view of the Grim Horde. Don't worry though, this is a maxi-glass shit, ain't no one breaking through that. Namely with Robin ranting about Ironwood and Jacques endlessly. Jacques tells Robin to shut up, as he's already heard the riot acts for what he's done, which really sets Willow off. It's clear Jacques isn't used to this, but Willow tells him off how little he cares about his own family, that he could work with people capable of such evil. Jacques retorts that he's done everything he can for his family, and when the argument gets heated, Whitley breaks and tells them to shut up as he cries, and everyone's left in silence. Watts simply says he agrees with Whitley, and that everyone's causing too much of a ruckus for him to get any rest, and Robin snidely calls him a snake with nearly as bad a mustache as Jacques. Ironwood and Winter, along with a platoon of soldiers, enter the prison, much to the prisoners' annoyance. Winter escorts Whitley and Willow out to speak with them privately in the prisoners' library, but when Jacques calls out to her, Winter simply glares at him and he shuts right up. Ironwood stays back to have a word with Crow, saying that Clover's gonna pull through, to which Crow bites back, just in time for you to throw him back into the line of fire. Ironwood admits he's unsure of whether Crow actually did it, but they'll know for sure once Clover comes to, and no matter what, he still considers Crow a friend. Robin asks if Ironwood really thinks this is how you treat friends, and if he really thinks attacking and imprisoning them is gonna help them beat what's outside their windows. Ironwood admits that his goal isn't to defeat Salem, but to escape. In his eyes, Oz's need to fight her for eternity has been the cause of so much needless suffering. This is all that can be done. All Crow has left to say is that if anything happens to his nieces or their friends, Crow will make sure James pays for it personally. Ending the conversation, Ironwood has the guards open Watt's cell and drag him out. Watts asks what calls for such an occasion, and James admits he has no one else he can turn to, so he's trying to make amends to an old friend he hurt. Over in the library, Willow asks Winter how she could go along with what Ironwood is doing, and Winter admits that while she's wary, she still trusts Ironwood with her life. Widley bites back how Winter doesn't seem to trust her own family. Winter says Jacques broke that trust long ago, but Widley says he wasn't talking about father. He meant himself and Weiss. Ever since he was little, he was left to fend for himself while his sisters got to see the world and forge their own paths. All Whitley had was the path his father had laid out, and he believed that making it his own was all he'd ever have. But now with that gone, he at least expected his sisters to come back so they could all support each other, but it looks like he was wrong. End on Winter's sad face. Ironwood meanwhile takes Watts to his old workstation. Watts is surprised it's still intact, and Ironwood says he had it left alone to remember his friend Arthur after losing him. James apologizes for overlooking Watts' research and hard work for all those years, enough to drive him to turn against Atlas out of sheer spite, and now he's hoping that if they can save Atlas, they can also salvage their friendship. Watts seems confused, but asks what James needs. Ironwood says he needs Watts to eliminate his virus and restore Mantle's heating grid before sunset. Watts makes a quip that the dead don't seem like a group that'd be quick to complain about the cold, but when it makes James tense, Watts dismisses it as his usual dark humor and gets to work. James is relieved, but it's very clear Watts is playing James like a damn fiddle. Ruby, Weiss, Ren, and May arrive at Snowshoe Shipping, an SDC subsidiary in Mantle which handles items being delivered to and received from Atlas through pneumatic tubes. Once they enter, they find it filled with recolored Elysian Knights, and Ruby immediately destroys one before Weiss could explain they're owned and operated by the SDC, not Ironwood. May's sure they've got this handled thanks to her invisibility semblance, but what she's not so sure of is how they're gonna get into the compound from here, to which Weiss points to the pneumatic tubes. Ren is incredibly skeptical, but Weiss insists that this system will take them directly into the compound. May just hopes it isn't as corpses. But the reason Weiss is so certain it'll work is thanks to Ruby, to which Ruby goes, "What?" Ruby's semblance turns her into a barrage of rose petals for quick travel, but she's also able to carry others with her. By turning their entire group into rose petals, they'll be able to safely zoom through the pneumatic tube and come out the other side unscathed. Ruby's of course nervous, as she's never had to transport more than 2 people before, nor go such a long distance, but Weiss insists with the speed boost the tube provides, they should be fine. Reluctantly, Ruby agrees. Once they find the tube for the military compound, they hit the launch button on the main console on the count of 3, at which point Ruby uses her semblance, grabs the others, and zooms through the tube at top speed. They arrive at their destination safely, though they're all a bit dizzy. Thankfully, May's invisibility semblance, along with the maps of the compound Pietro provided, make traversing the place undetected easier. They stop off at the entrance to the prison block, where Ruby and Ren split off to find Crow and the others, while Weiss and May go to retrieve the Amity Tower launch codes. As they look around, it seems there are no guards anywhere. Ruby tries to make small talk with Ren, though admits she feels a bit awkward given they're not as close, and Ren's not making it easier with answers seemingly as short as possible. Ruby levels with Ren on whether he agrees with what she's been doing. Ren pauses for a bit, then answers, honestly, no. Though Ironwood may have had his shortcomings, Ren still believes he was doing his best all along, and that he can be reasoned into saving Mantle with the staff's power if they're open and honest with him. Ruby's not so sure, but Ren insists that they hurry. He's going to keep a lookout while Ruby heads in further. Over in Watt's lab, Ironwood and a few soldiers are overseeing his tasks while the two enjoy lunch. Watts inquires as to why Ironwood is so set on helping Mantle, along with why he hasn't just used the staff to do the job for him. Ironwood admits they can't reach the staff. Cinder attacked the hospital last night, and Freya wound up dying and giving the Winter Maiden power to Penny. And now she's in hiding along with Ruby and her friends. He's hoping that this kind of show of support to Mantle will help bring Penny out into the open, and then they can apply their plan for Amity Tower to Atlas and escape Remnant. Watts takes note of the mentioning of Amity, but right away Ironwood gets a notification. The security cameras have picked up Ruby and Ren in the prison block, and he also gets a notification of someone trying to access the server room, which catches Watts' attention. James contacts Winter through his comm link and tells her it's time, and leaves the soldiers to keep an eye on Watts while he handles this. Watts silently thanks the gods for their mercy. Thankfully for him, the soldiers don't understand any of his technobabble, so Watts quickly fumbles for his notes he claims he used to write code on, only to quickly hide an old cracked scroll from his desk drawer in his pocket. Once that's done, he accesses Pietro's files from the Penny Project and gets to work. Over in another part of the compound, Weiss and May find the walkway to the server room. They make conversation on the way in, namely because Weiss is curious as to how a marigold wound up as part of the Happy Huntresses. May talks freely about how, as Percival, the name she used when she was assigned male, her family often expected her to live up to the legacy as the heir to the marigold fortune, even after she transitioned. But as she learned about the shady dealings with the SDC and the military, she wanted no part in the misery they contributed to Mantle and the rest of the world. And so, she left, and Henry took her place. Confident in her decision, May decided to attend Atlas Academy to become a huntress, and that's where she met Robin, Joanna, and Fiona. And once they graduated, they became the Happy Huntresses and dedicated themselves to serving Mantle directly without the influence of Atlas in their pockets. Weiss definitely understands May's journey as it parallels quite a bit of her own. She asks if she ever thinks about Henry, but May writes him off as a spoiled, self-centered brat and asks if she's the same with Whitley. Weiss did used to think that, but now that there's a crisis on their doorstep, all she wants is to keep her family safe. All of her family. May jokes about how thick Schnee blood must be, which isn't surprising given Weiss' semblance hasn't evolved from the standard Schnee brand glyphs. This confuses Weiss for a bit, to which May explains how her semblance started out as simple invisibility, but later evolved into the invisible fields they're within now. It's apparently quite rare, but it does get Weiss thinking. They open the door to the server room, only for a voice to call out for them to stop. Winter is here and demands they stand down. Weiss insists that May get the launch codes while she deals with her sister, and May jokes again that she hopes blood is thicker than water after all. And shit gets more tense as Ren is keeping watch, and who should approach him other than General Ironwood himself. Ren tenses up a bit, but he doesn't draw his weapons, which Ironwood notices, and Ren still addresses Ironwood formally. Ironwood asks Ren if he's alright. Ren doesn't answer immediately, and after a bit he asks, "Were you honest in wanting to help Mantle?" We then cut to the inside of the prison where Ruby comes across everyone in their cells. Crow is ecstatic to see Ruby safe and sound, but asks what she's doing here, and where Yang and the others are. It would take too long to explain, so right now Ruby's just examining the cells to see if there's a way to break everyone free. Jacques actually knows, given the SDC helped design and build these prisons, which surprises no one, but even if it comes from Jacques-ass, help is help. The terminal up in the prison control room could turn off the barriers, but they'd need administrative access to do so. Alternatively, the hard light dust is powered by a smaller system separate from the military's power grid, as to prevent breakouts should the compound's power ever go out. The generators are nearby, but it becomes clear there's no time to search for them when Ironwood's voice booms through the room. "It's good to see you again, Ruby." Ruby immediately draws crescent rows, though Ironwood holds off on drawing his guns. Instead, he tries to reason with her, saying he cares about Mantle. Ruby counters, saying if that were true, he wouldn't have left them in the dark for so long about Amity Tower, taking resources they needed to survive and going after Robin, the only one standing up for them. And moreover, he wouldn't be so quick to leave Mantle right in Salem's path. What good will a restored heating grid do if the entire city is destroyed by the Grimm after all? To Ruby, Ironwood's actions are nothing more than empty promises. Ironwood asks Ruby if she thinks he's lying, then laughs, saying he must have picked it up from Oz, just like Ruby and her friends did. Ironwood loathes the fact he lied to Mantle all through Volume 7, but he did it because he believed it was necessary to prevent mass panic. He also knows that Oz withheld the truth about Salem for the same reason, as did Ruby and her friends about the lamp and telling Robin about Amity. At this rate, Ironwood's ability to trust anyone and his ability to believe anyone could ever trust him have both been almost completely dissolved. And he finds it ironically amusing how Salem seems to be the only honest party involved. Ruby says that if Ironwood thinks that, then he knows they have until midnight to save both Mantle and Atlas. But the best answer Ironwood has is to evacuate as much of Mantle to Atlas as they can, and then proceed with using the staff to leave Remnant behind. If Salem can never die, and she is on the offensive now, then even if they escape to another kingdom, Salem will follow them, laying waste to the whole planet till she gets what she wants. Ruby refuses to believe this is the best solution, to which Ironwood is at least thankful they're at least now being honest before he draws his guns. Back in the server room, May is scrambling through the files to find the damn launch codes when Ruby contacts her mid-fight on their comlinks, telling them they need administrative access to open the prison cells. Under her breath, May is just like, "Great, more problems." Outside on the platform, Weiss and Winter clash. Weiss tries to get through to Winter, telling her that their family needs them, to which Winter counters, saying she intends to protect them through following Ironwood, even if they don't understand. Using the maddening sloppy touches of her technique to get the upper hand, Weiss barely manages to defeat Winter. May, meanwhile, is just about done, but not before Watts is able to drop a program file he just finished into the launch codes, and once May is done, onto the thumb drive she brought to carry the files. She's also got what they need to access the prison terminal, so we are off. Back in the prison, Ruby's fight with Ironwood continues. Again, not a choreography expert here, but the main thing to show here is that neither party is trying to majorly injure the other. It's during this fight we also see a major feature of Ironwood's new arm, a dust cannon. Kind of like Cordo's, but more efficient and smaller. And oh dear, that shit is deadly. And even though Ruby thinks they could open the cells, there's also a solid chance that they could vaporize the people inside. Crow's clearly stressed, and his misfortune semblance of course seems to strike and nearly cost Ruby the fight. When Crow mentions this, Willow gets an idea and summons a saber outside the cell, which does momentarily buy Ruby enough time before Ironwood kills it. Jacques and Robin are all, "Why didn't you do that earlier?" To which Willow is surprised, given it should be clear from her husband in the next cell over that her judgment is clearly suspect. Though she does try to help Ruby, it's clear her semblance is rusty from decades of going unused. Weiss and May reach the control room where they find Ren on guard. Weiss is confused, though when Ren draws his weapons, she puts 2 and 2 together immediately. She apologizes, but Ruby needs her right now. They do fight briefly, but Weiss barges right through Ren and takes him out easily, doing her best not to hurt him too badly. Once that's done, she goes to help Ruby while May gets the cells open, by which I mean Weiss summons her knight and busts through the damn window for an entrance worthy of a queen. Once that's done, a bit into the fight and everyone is free, May tosses Crow and Robin their weapons, and we get a group fight with Ironwood, but he ain't no pushover. And Jacques, of course, goes to hide in the corner, along with Willow and Whitley. Ruby and Weiss manage to create a mist to give themselves cover, and with May's semblance, they escape into the hangar, board an airship, and peace the fuck out. It's a bit crowded given the amount of people on board, but right now Ruby's just grateful Crow's okay, only for Weiss to break the news about Ren's turn. Back at the base, Ironwood checks back in on Watts, who succeeded in restoring the heating grid and removing his virus. Ironwood escorts him back to his cell, but Watts is clearly overjoyed that his own plans are already in motion. We begin out in the tundra, where the mountains just outside Mantle begin. Yang, Blake, Jean, and Nora arrive at the pass on old hoverbikes from Pietro's workshop, and they all feel uneasy with the purple storm clouds, along with the Monstra and Grimhorde directly overhead. Still, they're here to get an idea of what Mantle's in for when midnight comes, and maybe put a dent in Salem's forces to give the city a fighting chance. Yang specifically is hoping they'll find a way up to that damn whale, rescue Oscar, and take Salem down. And her audacity really is not helping Blake's anxiety at the moment. Heading a bit further in, they reach a chasm through which a river runs, where the treacherous terrain forces them to proceed with caution while they keep an eye out for nearby Grimm. Nora quietly gets Blake's attention and says she needs to talk to her, privately. Jean and Yang are curious, and Blake says they should split up for a bit to get a better idea of the area. Yang automatically signals Blake to go with her, but Blake insists that she go with Nora. When Yang asks why, Blake struggles to come up with an excuse. But Nora relents and just says she needs to talk about something she thinks only Blake can help her with. Begrudgingly, Yang agrees, and she and John anxiously take one of the chasm trails leading higher, while Blake and Nora decide to follow the river. Farther into the mountains, meanwhile, the Grimm pool has fully formed within an ancient caldera, giving rise to Beowulfs, Ursai, and many other Grimm. Hazel, Tyrion, and Mercury arrive in their airship, overseeing the lake from a distance. Tyrion is in awe over their queen's work, to which Mercury jokes about it being a literal pool of whale vomit. Hazel takes out the Hellbrine capsule, saying that once they toss it in, the Grimm inside will be set loose immediately, meaning the sooner they can get out of Dodge, the better. Mercury suggests he throw it in like a baseball, which certainly upsets Tyrion given he views the capsule as a fragile work of art which requires a delicate touch. He suggests he do the job himself, and Mercury comments that he hopes Tyrion swan dives headfirst in with it. Looking to Mantle in the distance with sadness in his eyes, Hazel insists he be the one to do it. We cut back to Blake and Nora by the river. Nora asks Blake about what she does when she and Yang have an argument, and Blake says she usually tries to stay true to what she wants, though she admits having a problem with folding under pressure. Blake asks Nora about Ren, and Nora admits they've been growing apart, and she doesn't know what to make of it. She's not even sure whether she and Ren are together, as they've never clearly defined it, but she knows that she would do anything for him. Blake talks about how she's often felt the same with Yang and her last partner. She'd often lose herself in other people, following their lead and trying to support them, so much so she'd lose sight of who she was. It's hard to shake that codependent tendency, but she advises Nora to try and remember she's a strong person all on her own, with her own interests and her own goals. Those should never be sacrificed for anyone else. Nora needs some time to think through this, but she appreciates Blake's advice. The touching moment is disrupted, however, as they notice the Grim Ichor slowly flowing down the river. Yang and Jean, meanwhile, are super tense, and Yang doesn't appreciate Jean trying to lighten the mood with jokes, nor humming the Camp Camp theme song. Jean asks if Yang wants to talk about anything, Yang says no, and when Jean presses a bit more, Yang snaps and tells Jean they don't have time to talk about their feelings while the world is ending. Out of nowhere, Jean apologizes for losing the lamp and for letting Oscar go off on his own, which he believes ultimately made Oscar vulnerable to being kidnapped. Yang tells him that if he wants to make up for it, then he'd best stop beating himself up as usual and help her find a way to take the fight to Salem directly. Jean's clearly unsure about that, but before he can say anything, Yang notices a bird circling them overhead. She immediately notices the red eyes staring right at her, and the bird flies off. Yang says she thinks she spotted something and wants to investigate. Before Jean can follow, Yang tells him it'd be best if she handled this alone, while he focuses on meeting back up with Blake and Nora. As Yang goes off on her own, she comes to a small tunnel and walks inside, saying, "Okay, Mom, show yourself." The bird flies behind a rock, and out walks Raven, who comments on how Yang and her friends always manage to land themselves right in the middle of a disaster. At the end of the path, Jean reunites with Blake and Nora, who tell him about the river leading to a larger source of Grim Ichor. They ask where Yang is, and Jean tells them how Yang said she needed to go off on her own back in the chasm. Blake decides to go check on her, leaving Jean and Nora to awkwardly wait for them. Back in the cave, Yang is pissed that Raven has the nerve to show up after all she's done. Raven says that Yang should at least know why she bailed, and when Yang asks if she knows about Ozma and Salem's past, Raven jokes, "Who do you think asked Jin the first question?" She then elaborates that technically it was Summer who asked. Summer went to Haven on her own to learn what Ozpin was hiding from them all, and that's when she, Raven, Leo, and the last Spring Maiden got the full story, and Raven's suspicions were confirmed. Yang asks if that was before Summer. She can't finish her question, but Raven nods yes. She has no clue what happened to Summer. She just regrets letting her go off on her own. Yang asks if Raven's here to gloat about being right, but she isn't. Actually, Raven's here to just talk. as she's been doing a lot of thinking after Haven. She even went to Summer's grave to reflect, and Ty found her there one night. Once Raven fully admitted to everything, also confirming Ty knew about as much as Crow, she wound up trying to help Glinda clear out Beacon. She's also been keeping an eye on RWBY and Yang for Ty's sake, and reveals that her semblance actually gives her a glimpse of what the people she's bonded to are seeing and feeling. It's part of how she always is able to drop in at the right time. Yang says they don't need any help, not from her. And Raven gets that. Still, Raven reminds Yang that having two maidens go up against Salem might give them a fighting chance, especially considering she's had years to master the Spring Maiden power, while Penny's still inexperienced. It's here we see that Blake has come across the cave and can hear echoes of Yang and Raven's conversation, and Blake can't help but listen nervously. Yang bites back about how Raven will probably run away from Salem the moment they need her most, just like she always has. Accepting Yang's answer, Raven opens a portal back to Vale, but leaves with a final bit of advice. Tell her partner how she feels, and maybe talk about how she feels, including all the uglier emotions. It's obvious to everyone anyway. Blake is tempted to bail as Yang comes back out, but she decides to stay. Yang is a bit surprised, but asks Blake how much she heard. Blake says Yang can talk about this if she ever wants to, which Yang says, "Cool, I don't want to," before hopping on the bike and motioning for Blake to follow her. Jean and Nora meanwhile talk a bit about Ren's coldness and anxiety that's been building for a while now. Jean says he believes in both his teammates, but Nora stays silent. Their conversation is cut short as Blake and Yang arrive, and they follow the Ichor deeper into the mountains. They come across the caldera holding the Grim Pool. Jean suggests that maybe if they come back later with RWBY, her silver eyes might be able to destroy or petrify it, but Yang shushes him as she spots Hazel, Mercury, and Tyrion getting closer to the pool. They head down trying to get closer while maintaining their cover, and catch wind of their plan to drop the capsule in the pool and create even more Grim to let loose on Mantle. Hazel holds up the capsule examining it, which makes Tyrion especially impatient as to why he's hesitating. Blake takes the opportunity to use Gamble Shroud to swipe the capsule, and Jean, Nora, and Yang cover her while she makes a break for it. Only problem is Tyrion, the agile creep he is, easily manages to get around them and head Blake off. And now, it's fight time! Jean goes to help Blake, so we've got Blake and Jean versus Tyrion, Yang versus Mercury, and Nora versus Hazel. Nora does briefly try to get through to Hazel that his sister couldn't possibly want this, but that just pisses Hazel the fuck off as he yells about how she couldn't imagine what Salem has promised him. During the fight, Yang yells at Blake to run, and Tyrion, noticing Blake's reaction, comments on how it doesn't seem her friends are confident in her abilities. This causes Blake's semblance to freak out, and she drops the capsule, which results in a quick game of grab the MacGuffin, which Nora wins before she speeds off and Tyrion chases after her, and Jean chases after him to give Nora some backup. Then, time for some new fights, by which I mean Blake versus Mercury and Yang versus Hazel. Tyrion catches up with Nora. When he mentions his curiosity as to whether Nora will be able to hold her own without her friends, he can see he's struck a nerve, then lunges. This definitely is not ideal for Nora, given her fighting style is predicated more on power than speed. Right as Jean arrives, Tyrion seizes an opening and poisons Nora with his stinger, grabbing the capsule as she drops it. He bolts back for the caldera while Jean rushes to heal Nora, with the main goal being to get back to the bikes and get her out of harm's way. He gives Yang and Blake the rundown over their comlinks, so once Tyrion arrives at the caldera, Yang spots him holding the capsule and fires off, knocking Tyrion back and sending the capsule skyward. She's hit by Hazel before she can grab it, so Blake rushes to grab the capsule, only for Mercury to swipe it in midair and throw it into the pool. Everyone goes silent. The air is still, and after a few moments, the Ichor starts to bubble like boiling water, and the earth shakes. Grim begin rising from the pool in droves, and everyone bails. The villains head back for their airship, while Blake and Yang run to the bikes, resulting in a full-on escape the disaster scene to the sky is falling through hordes of Grim, parts of the mountain falling all around them. Yang nearly falls down a crevice, forcing her to leap over to Blake's bike in the escape while hers falls. They manage to get the hell out of Dodge right as the song ends, thankfully. We get a bird's eye view of the expanding Ichor pool, along with all the Grim being created from the villain's airship as Hazel pilots. Tyrion is in awe and congratulates Mercury on his work while throwing shade at Hazel. Mercury goes along with Tyrion by feigning excitement, but Hazel is just silently, clearly horrified. Blake and Yang, meanwhile, exit the mountains and look back at the Grim Horde growing in the distance, and Yang, who's on the back, spots an Ichor river slowly following them. A river of Grim, headed straight for Mantle. We begin at Amity Coliseum as sunset approaches, where Pietro is overseeing Penny, Ciel, and Willow as they make the final adjustments to the tower's infrastructure to get it ready for launch, with some help from Jacques and Whitley given the SDC helped build Amity. Jacques gets a bit snippy at Willow, and when Willow actually stands her ground, Whitley says he needs to go check on something else. Jacques sees how uncomfortable he's made Whitley, then apologizes to Willow, and she's so surprised he knows how to even pronounce sorry that she's convinced she must be hallucinating from exhaustion. Pietro is not buying it though. Jacques helped Watts frame his little girl for murder so he could win an election after all, and tried to get Penny shut down. Though Jacques is initially defensive, he stops himself and admits it's true. Though his own daughters left him, he'd always feared something happening to them out in the world, which he uses as a baseline for how Pietro must feel. It's clear Jacques is aware he's hit rock bottom and is trying to figure out how we got here, which is better than nothing, everyone supposes. Penny and Ciel take a quick break to check on the others, who right now are recording a message for the world to catch them up on everything. Magic, the relics, the maidens, Salem, the siege on Atlas, so on and so forth. Namely, Weiss is holding the scroll while Ruby rehearses her script, which May helped her look over. All the while, Maria coaches Ruby to project her voice with confidence if she wants all of Remnant to believe her. Though the reminder that the whole planet will see this doesn't really help soothe Ruby's nerves. They're outside for this so that they can record Monstra and the Grim Horde as part of their proof, and right as they mention the Maiden Power, Penny, Ciel, and Whitley waltz on over. Penny asks if they're sure about her staying on Amity. She's only needed for the launch sequence and could easily return afterwards. And even if she doesn't fully understand how to use her magic, she could still help against Salem's forces, especially if they find a way into the vault to get the Staff of Creation. Ruby and Weiss disagree though, as they believe the risks outweigh the prospects. If Salem can't reach Amity and by extension can't reach Penny, she'll be unable to access the Winter Vault at all, thus the staff will remain out of her clutches. The rest of them should be able to protect Mantle, though it's clear Ruby, Weiss, and Maria are less certain as to whether they can defeat Salem, even if they miraculously got Ironwood to fight alongside them. It's all getting heavy, so Ruby decides she needs a breather. She decides to go find Crow and check in with him. Weiss and Whitley, meanwhile, have a private talk where Weiss asks about how things are going with their parents. Whitley mentions them arguing, to which Weiss is not surprised. Whitley asks if Weiss thinks their family is broken beyond repair, and Weiss isn't sure. Winter is still loyal to Ironwood, and Jacques is the root of all the awful things that they went through. At the very least, Weiss promises she's not going to leave Whitley behind again, and apologizes for doing so. Whitley admits he was jealous, and asks about what Beacon was like. Weiss says it's taken her a long time to realize, but Beacon was her true home. Nothing was handed to her on a silver platter there, like it always had been in Atlas, and it forced her to grow up and change, especially in the way she used to talk about Faunus. Weiss says that once they're through all of this, and they will get through this, she intends to properly introduce Whitley to all her friends and give him a tour of Vale. As he and Willow approach, Jacques mentions having some associates in Vale they could go to for recommendations, and Weiss is quick to take a jab about how after becoming an impoverished trader, they likely won't be excited to even give him the time of day. Jacques nearly scolds her but holds himself back and admits he deserves that one. There's a bit of an awkward silence, and Willow asks Jacques if there's anything he wants to say. Jacques admits he's not sure how to word this, but he's sorry, to which Weiss goes, "For what?" Jacques is nervous, then goes, "Everything?" Whitley reminds him of cooperating with criminals in league with a Dark Lord bent on world conquest, But Weiss says there's a whole lot more. Marrying their mother solely for the family name and fortune, having children to sculpt a worthy heir rather than actually showing them affection and love, setting a goddamn armagigus on her so she could leave home to become her own person, which she quickly reminds him got her the scar across her eye. He drove Winter to Ironwood, a more tolerable authority figure, and more than that, he and his business have ruined so many lives, including those of the Faunus Blake fights for. She also admits frustrations with Willow for marrying Jacques in the first place and putting up with it, along with sleeping and drinking her days away, leaving her children vulnerable to Jacques' manipulation and cruelty. But she also knows that she is in some way a victim, just like they all were. If Jacques wants to apologize, fine, but Weiss is not obligated to accept it, and she storms the hell off. Jacques takes a breath, processing that whole scene. Whitley is surprised that their mother managed to stomach all that without even joking about trying to find a drink, to which Willow says it's high time she's sobered up. No one's sure if that counts as a pun, but it's a cute moment at least. But on a real note, she actually does have a massive withdrawal headache being made worse by all the yelling and stress. Over in the military compound, Winter has a briefing with Ren to cover everything he knows about what his friends are planning. Ren says that Penny and the others are likely down in Mantle helping with evacuations in the crater. But Winter's not so sure, especially given Weiss accessing the server room suggests something else. Ren doesn't answer immediately. Winter asks Ren why he turned against his friends, but Ren insists he didn't, then asks Winter if she believes she's turned against Weiss. Winter says no, and when Ren asks why, Winter explains how her goal is to protect Weiss and her family, even if they don't agree with her methods, and Ren says he's the same way. Winter's not sure what to say, but if her family is down in Mantle, they'd best move to bring them safely to Atlas before midnight. Elsewhere, Clover has exited surgery and is finally coming to, waking up to the Aesops gathered all around him. They all bombard him with questions as to how he's feeling and what happened, but Vine pulls them all away from him to give Clover some time to orient himself. Clover asks what's going on, and the Aesops fill him in on Salem's siege and Ruby and her friends turning on Ironwood. Clover asks about Crow and Robin, and Harriet specifically is super pissed about how they escaped, mentioning how Crow basically got away with attempted murder, which really confuses Clover. He clarifies that Tyrion is the one who stabbed him with Crow's sword. This throws the Aesops for a loop, and Harriet insists Clover couldn't be sure, especially given he was so close to Crow, he might just be convincing himself of this. But Clover retorts, yeah, I'm pretty sure the crazed serial killer is the one who tried to kill me, not the fellow huntsman trying to save people in his own way. Right as shit gets tense, Ironwood enters and says he needs to speak with Clover for a bit, and also sends the Aesops to Mantle to find Penny and her friends. They do ask about evacuations, but Ironwood insists that they do not begin until Penny turns herself in. Once the Aesops leave, Clover confirms it was Tyrion who attacked him, and Ironwood asks if Clover worked with Crow and Robin to save Mantle. Clover says no and tells him the full situation. Robin tried to stop Clover from arresting Crow, and after they crashed and Robin fell unconscious, Clover fought Crow in an attempt to bring him into custody. Tyrion took full advantage of this chaos and played them both, and Clover admits he should have prioritized subduing Tyrion before going after Crow. Clover asks Ironwood if he was intending to leave Mantle behind, and he admits it's true, just as Robin assumed. It was a heat-of-the-moment decision, but now Ironwood's goal is to find Penny and have her use the staff to evacuate as many people from Mantle to Atlas as possible before midnight when Salem invades. Ironwood asks if Clover can get behind that, and Clover says, "Whatever you believe is best, sir." Back on Amity, Robin and Crow stand out on one of the landing pads, staring at Monstra in the distance. Robin asks if Crow is sure about what he's doing. Crow insists he's never been more sure of anything. They pause for a bit, and Robin asks about what happened with Clover, given she was knocked out the whole time. Crow stays silent. Robin says whatever happened, James wouldn't lie about Clover being okay, and she knows Crow cares about him too much to actually try and hurt him. To which Crow says his semblance makes sure that he never has to try to hurt anyone around him, even the people he loves most. Ruby runs up to them to ask what they're up to. Robin decides to give Ruby and her uncle some time to talk and heads back inside, and Ruby asks Crow if he's okay. Crow says nothing, then reveals his plan. He's gonna fly all the way to the Grim Whale, rescue Oscar, and get back the lamp. Ruby's of course completely against this, but Crow insists that someone has to go save Oscar before it's too late. He wishes he'd apologize to Oscar after punching him, as he never once thought as to whether Oscar could feel the pain he dealt to Ozpin. Crow had never really even considered Oscar his own person beyond being the next Oz, and even though he's not sure he can forgive Ozpin, he knows he doesn't deserve everything Salem has done to him, nor what she might be doing to him right now. RWBY makes Crow promise he and Oscar will be back safe, with or without the lamp, and Crow agrees before flying off in bird form. Maria's super glad that Crow's getting off his ass and doing something productive, then asks if RWBY plans on doing the same. And here we get real. What is RWBY's plan to deal with Salem? RWBY recalls what Salem said in Ironwood's office, and says she's not sure whether the Silver Eyes could vanquish her. Maria is confused. She's certain Salem sent talk after her because she viewed Silver-Eyed warriors as a threat, and RWBY agrees, but if that was the case, then surely one warrior would have already defeated Salem. For all they know, it might just erase the Grimm part of her and leave her human form behind, which Salem could immediately fix by jumping back into a Grimm pool. RWBY's main hope is that they can defeat Salem long enough to where they can come up with some other plan, to which Maria mentions how that sounds a lot like Ozpin's approach. In any case, they need to handle things one step at a time, the next of which being finishing that damn message for the world. Down in the mantle crater, Jean is using his semblance to stabilize Nora, and it seems to be working for the time being, but they don't have any anti-venom or medicine down here. Jean tells Nora not to talk so she can rest, but Nora says she's so sorry for causing more problems. She just wanted to prove herself. Jean completely understands and says that he's learned he has nothing to prove, and neither does Nora. Meanwhile, Blake and Yang are helping to construct a hard light dust barrier around the crater walls to keep out the Grimm River, the dust having been looted from the SDC refineries. Once they're done, Yang says that she and Blake head back out and take down Salem, but Blake insists that they can do more good here in Mantle, making sure everyone is safe when the Grimm Horde gets here. They're quiet for a bit, and Blake asks if that was Yang's mother back in the cave, to which Yang goes, "Oh yeah, you weren't there." Blake tries to give the usual pleasantries, but Yang immediately cuts her off, saying if one more person tells her that she can talk if she needs or wants to, she'll lose it. There's nothing she needs to talk about. Blake argues that it seems she has a lot she wants to talk about though, but is holding back. Her anger boiling over, Yang admits she does, that Blake just left without a word after the fall of Beacon, though Blake has never talked about why, or what she was doing that whole time outside of Yang's assumptions. Even the fact they haven't talked about Adam since. Right as she says the name, Blake's semblance acts up, and she doubles over in pain as she glitches out. Yang stops, and once Blake calms down, Yang asks what the fade out is. Once Blake gathers her strength, she admits she's always struggled in talking about what's bothering her. She sits with the pain quietly, processing it until it slowly fades. She doesn't explode with anger the way that Yang does. But this pain hasn't faded. It has sat with her, weighing down on her shoulders. She's always resented her semblance, just like she admitted back in Mountain Glen. But when she was little, she'd often move around with her parents, who in turn often traveled across Remnant wherever the White Fang's efforts were needed. One day, Blake snuck out to a local White Fang rally against her parents' wishes. Mantle police broke up their march and attacked some of the protesters, with Gira and Kali just barely managing to find Blake and get her to safety as she was paralyzed with fear. Her parents were so angry she wound up hiding in her room, and when they came back to check on her, they couldn't see her. They ran out crying for Blake to show herself, but they just couldn't see her. Her parents left to go find her, and it was only later that night when they came home and Blake had run out of tears that she'd come back. This is the first time since then her semblance has done this, and she's worried if she doesn't keep herself together, she'll disappear into the shadows entirely. Yang decides to back off, but it's clear neither of them are feeling well and they still have a lot to talk about. Meanwhile, on Monstra, Salem resumes speaking with Oscar, though this time walking through the whale. Oscar talks about how he'd always wanted to go out and see the world, but he never imagined himself being an actual huntsman, especially when it's just to act as another host for Ozma's soul until he loses himself completely. Salem nods, saying that that's how Oz tends to use people, as pawns in his game, all to please the god of light, who himself was cruel and detached. Oscar does ask about Salem's plan though, why she's doing all of this, and Salem says her mission has never changed. She wants to create a world where all people live forever in peace, with her using the relics to maintain such a world. She's always operated in silence because she knew it would turn the world against her in the long term. Why accept her as the queen when she laid conquest to it by force? It's only now she has been forced out of the shadows given Oz's shrewd tactics. They come across Hazel and Oscar is immediately nervous. Instead, Hazel apologizes to Oscar for Haven, saying his grudge is with Ozpin only. He also confirms why he's joined Salem. She promised to use the Staff of Creation to resurrect Gretchen, reuniting them in Salem's new world for all time. It's the only thing keeping Hazel going aside from his thirst for revenge. Salem says she wants to fulfill the desires of all her followers as a sign of gratitude and an incentive. In fact, Salem believes she could use the relics to remove Ozma's soul from Oscar, ending the reincarnation process for good, or at least trapping Ozma's soul for eternity so Oscar can live his own life. Salem escorts Oscar back to his chamber, and that's when Ozpin asks as to Oscar's plan. Oscar is trying to get on Salem's good side. Well, 1, to stay alive, and 2, to learn as much about her and how she treats her followers so he can find a weakness to exploit. That's when he talks about Hazel and asks about the staff. Ozpin confirms that the Staff of Creation can't create true life. An imitation of flesh can be created, but that spark of life, the soul, can't be created by the staff's power. Oscar finds this interesting and wonders if they could use this to turn Hazel against Salem. He also asks about the God of Light, and Ozpin confirms that given the eons he's had to think of it, he agrees the God of Light is trash. As a divine being, he's not capable of understanding mortal beings, nor does he care to view them as anything but possessions, as a reflection of his own goodness, rather than autonomous, complex beings. It's part of why Oz is certain the God of Light didn't realize how cruel their reincarnation process was, because he's incapable of imagining each incarnation as his own person. Back down in Mantle, dusk has finally set in, and Blake and Yang test out the hard light barriers around the crater. They appear successful, but once they're switched back off, Blake notices something off. Stay echoes all around them. While Yang is frozen on the walls, Blake uses her semblance to jump away. Marrow and Harriet reveal themselves. They're placing the kids under arrest and demanding to know where Ruby and Penny are. And right as Yang tells them to stuff it, Blake swings around and hits Marrow, freeing Yang. Yang tells Blake to help her fight Harriet, but Blake says that they need to stay apart so Marrow can't freeze them both. That's gonna be a bit of a challenge, as Blake tries to stay out of Marrow's sight as he follows her into the city, while Yang struggles to keep up with Harriet. Over in the camp, meanwhile, Jean and Nora hear an argument outside. Vine and Elm are here, demanding that Fiona and Joanna hand over Ruby, Penny, and their friends. Otherwise, the rest of the Happy Huntresses will be taken into custody for assisting fugitives. Nora says that they can't let the Aesops take Fiona and Joanna. Without them, Mantle will be completely defenseless from what's coming. Jean agrees, but insists Nora stay in bed while he gives himself up to negotiate. Hopefully they'll be willing to help Nora up in Atlas even after all that's happened. Yang draws the fight away from the crater wall so that they won't damage the barriers. She's still struggling to keep up with Harriet, but decides on a new approach. After letting Harriet strike her a few times, Yang takes the built-up energy to activate her semblance, smashing the ground and sending Harriet flying and making the terrain more difficult for her to traverse. Harriet's not surprised Yang relies on such dirty tricks like her sister, to which Yang says that's rich coming from someone helping Ironwood to abandon half of his people. Blake is saying the same to Marrow, asking how he could just abandon Mantle like it was nothing. Marrow snaps, asking Blake if he thinks it's easy for him to admit the city he grew up in can't be saved. Ironwood is doing what must be done, and Marrow is following suit. Blake dives in to attack, but Marrow blocks. He and Harriet corner Blake and Yang, and when Blake uses her semblance to evade Marrow's, Harriet knocks her out immediately. Jean, meanwhile, is trying to negotiate with Vine and Elm, only for Nora to charge out with Magenhild in one hand and a lightning dust crystal in the other. Everyone tries to talk her into backing down, but Nora refuses. Vine mentions how they'll be able to treat her, but when he mentions how Ren will be waiting for them, and that he mentioned they'd probably be here, that's when Nora snaps, breaks the crystal, and her high-voltage semblance kicks into hyperdrive. Nora goes after Elm while Jean tries to fight Vine, but the latter fight does not last long before he's knocked out. Nora has gone berserk, and Elm keeps trying to get her to stop, especially as she grows more visibly exhausted from the venom. The other Aesops join in, and it takes all 4 of them to subdue Nora before she passes out. Ruby, Weiss, Robin, and May arrive just as the Aesops throw Blake, Yang, Jean, and Nora into their airship. May cloaks them all, while Robin and Weiss hold Ruby back. as there's no way they'd be able to take down all the Aesops, and so they sadly watch as the Aesops fly back to Atlas with their friends in custody. I think at this point it's kind of clear that writing is my passion. More than anything else, I love crafting stories and stepping into the shoes of other people through different characters, whether they be characters that I adore in general, in this glorified fan fiction, or my own characters. Which brings me to my upcoming new adult urban fantasy novel, Disinheritance from the Ashes. Promotion, man. Promotion. The most honest sponsor is yourself. Thank you, Emily, for that. Our story is set in a speculative future version of our own world following the revelation of magic and sorcerers to humankind, and humans not taking it well and doing what they do best, declaring war and ruining everything. In the ashes of this conflict, we follow Felix Brasher, an angsty little fire sorcerer who wields both blue flames and repressed childhood trauma, who now struggles with the pursuit of power versus actually understanding why that lust for power exists in the first place. It's a story of magic, friendship, love, trauma, creepy cults, men in masks. Stock footage is Plague Doctor, but he's actually not a Plague Doctor. I mean, there is a avian mask, but like it's a little bit. Point is cults offering you power. Also, it's very gay. Disinheritance is currently available for pre-order and will be released on November 16th of this year. Sales links are down in the description, along with a link to videos more about the book. And the first 4 chapters are over on my fancy author website. I've been crafting this thing for 5 years at this point, so if you could take the time to check it out, it would be much appreciated. I'm absolutely terrified, but it's like, hey, if you don't release it now, you probably never will. Now, back to Salem depriving the cast of RWBY of sleep. We begin on Monstra. Cinder, Emerald, and Neo approach Salem and her hound on the bridge. Cinder asks if they can go and hunt down RWBY and her friends, bring RWBY back, and take the Winter Maiden power. Salem asserts that she's already given everyone her ultimatum. Cinder argues that they're giving their enemies far too much time to scheme an escape plan, and they need to strike now. And Salem asks if this is the same thing Cinder felt when she came up with her plan to gather RWBY and her friends at Haven the same night it was to be destroyed, before she was swiftly defeated by Raven Bronwyn, of course. Salem is clearly exhausted by Cinder's impetuousness, and demands she stay on Monstra until ordered otherwise. And when Cinder tries arguing back, the hound growls and threatens to charge her again. Cinder backs down and instructs Emerald and Neo to follow her. The both of them hear Salem make a quip about Cinder never learning, to which the hound gives a disturbing, sick humanoid laughter. I wanted this out of Volume 8, and it's just, it's the creepiest laughter you've ever fucking heard. Out on the hangar, it's obvious Cinder's about to disobey orders, because it's Cinder. Emerald is a bit worried, but when Cinder is visibly annoyed, Emerald folds immediately as Neo rolls her eyes. They approach the airship, but stop when Mercury asks them what they think they're doing. Cinder says if Mercury doesn't plan on joining them, then he'd best stay out of their way and keep his mouth shut, to which Mercury says Salem already knows what they're doing. Everyone does. Mostly because Cinder's a broken record, and Emerald's her mindless little follower. He reminds Neo of Salem's warning. The next time they see her, if she does not pledge herself to Salem, it's over for her. Mercury heads back inside, and Cinder's ready to head out, find RWBY and Penny, and wreck some shit, with Emerald and Neo clearly nervous about whatever she's planning, or rather, not planning. Midnight is fast approaching, and Penny is out looking up at the auroras from the top of Amity, trying to keep herself from glancing towards Monstra and the growing Grim Horde. She flies down as Ciel calls to her, telling her that Amity is ready to launch. Penny asks Ciel if she thinks they're doing the right thing by staying on Amity when it launches, and Ciel isn't so sure there is a right thing. All they can do is what they believe is best. They head down to the arena where Pietro is making sure everything on the terminal is on the up and up, with Jacques, Willow, and Whitley gathered around. Once Penny and CL arrive, they begin the launch sequence. Penny connects to the terminal, and immediately we see the virus in the launch codes enter Penny's systems, and Penny mentions feeling unwell before she initiates the sequence. In the Atlas military prison, meanwhile, Blake, Yang, and Jean are all in cells next to Watts. The former three are clearly anxious, while Watts has finally gotten his scroll working, and he gets a notification of the virus accessing Penny's systems, evilly smiling at Amity with his stupid mustache. Immediately, Ruby's message begins playing on his scroll, and he rushes to turn off his scroll's audio as the others hear it. Luckily for him, the prison TV in the common area goes on and begins playing it as well. The message is currently playing on every device across Remnant as global comms are restored by Amity Tower. And here we get all our cameos. Glinda and Shopkeep in Vale, the Belladonnas and Ilya back in Mistral, and teams Sun and Coffee over in Vacuo, along with a glimpse of Headmaster Theodore of Shade Academy. Once Ironwood sees what's happening, he immediately realizes what Ruby has planned and orders a group of airships to head to Amity. Winter glances at Ren knowingly, but Ren says nothing. Unfortunately, Cinder, Emerald, and Neo also see this playing on their scrolls. Cinder puts 2 and 2 together and orders Neo to head for Amity, as Ruby and her friends must be there now. Back on Amity, Penny tries to sneak off as Ruby's message plays, but Pietro stops her. They get into a whole argument about whether staying on Amity is the right thing, and Penny asks if abandoning Remnant when they can help makes them any better than Ironwood. Right as the argument reaches its peak, the Colosseum shakes, and a fireball shoots through the arena. Cinder and the Bitch Pack are here, and right away, Cinder flies after Penny, with Penny leading Cinder outside to protect the others. Emerald tries to go help Cinder, but CL heads her off at the pass while Maria takes on Neo. Outside, Penny is mostly trying to keep distance between herself and Cinder. She tries using maiden magic, but Cinder mocks how she's clearly struggling to master a power that was never meant for her. Hell, the fact a soulless puppet like her was able to inherit the power feels like either a joke or some grand act of cosmic pity. As more damage is done to Amity, Penny tries luring Cinder away, but it's not long before Cinder catches on and rushes back to Amity, and Penny is forced to follow. Back in the Colosseum, Maria is kicking Neo's ass, while Emerald uses her hallucinations to get the upper hand against CL. Willow steps in, though when Emerald uses her semblance on her as well, some direction from Jacques and Whitley, along with a Nevermore summon, manage to help CL even the playing field with Emerald. Unfortunately, Cinder flies back in, knocking out both Maria and CL, as well as melting the pillars holding up the platform that Pietro and the Schnees are on. Penny flies in to protect them, then asks Cinder why she would serve Salem. Cinder replies with the infamous, "I don't serve anyone, and you wouldn't either if you weren't built that way." Penny replies she fights for the people she cares about, then uses the maiden power to freeze the pillars before they all melt completely. Cinder takes advantage of this and tries to steal the power with her Grim Hand, but Penny breaks free, and Willow takes over with freezing the pillars, leaving Penny to fight Cinder, Emerald, and Neo all at once. When Emerald uses her hallucination semblance, Penny uses her thermal vision to see through them, and she manages to knock both Emerald and Neo out. That's when Watts is finally able to see through Penny's eyes, and he initiates the virus. Penny's eyes begin flashing red, and when Cinder charges, Penny quickly dodges and slashes off Cinder's grim arm. While Cinder's doubled over in pain, a red-eyed Penny grabs Cinder by the throat and starts tossing her around the arena. Cinder's confused, but once Watts' voice begins speaking through Penny, that's when we cut back to Watts controlling her via his scroll, which Blake, Yang, and Jean take note of from their cells. This dark Penny brutally attacks Cinder, and Watts asks if Salem sent her to do this, or if this is another one of her harebrained schemes, just like when she stormed into Freya's hospital room, only for Ironwood's war machine to wind up with the Winter Maiden power, or her grand failure back at Haven. At least this time, Watts can see to it personally that Cinder stays dead. The Fall Maiden power can be recovered later. In this way, Salem has an immortal puppet to serve as a vessel for the Maiden powers that will be infinitely more useful than Cinder ever was, and far less pathetic. This fight leads to Cinder being blasted from Amity and left to fall towards the mountains, right in time for Emerald and Neo to come to. Emerald's clearly in shock, and Watts tells her if she wants to go corpse hunting, she's more than welcome to. Emerald drags Neo into their airship as they go to find Cinder, while Pietro and the others are terrified by what they're seeing. Ciel and Maria awaken right as Dark Penny takes off, spawning some small Atlassian aircrafts approaching fast. Watts quickly uses Penny to destroy them, sending them falling thousands of feet. One ship is thrown into one of Amity's stabilizers, and Watts decides to take out Amity Tower while he's at this. He guides Penny back inside Amity, where he's confronted by everyone gathered around the terminal. Pietro demands Watts release his daughter, and Watts scoffs at the notion he really still considers Penny a daughter. He's harbored so much hatred and contempt for Pietro's sentimentality, as well as the fact Ironwood was stupid enough to reward it and bring it to fruition rather than his own ideas. Still, Watts feels life works in mysterious ways, as now the driving force behind what's led him to join Salem is now going to be the tool he uses to tear down those who've wronged him. He tries to attack, but finds he can't. Penny seems to be resisting as her eyes flash back to green, and her voice starts to break through Watts. Everyone calls out to Penny to keep fighting, that they're here and that they need her, and Ciel and Pietro specifically tell Penny how much they love her. Watts manages to get a shot at the terminal before Penny forces herself to fly away, with Pietro and Ciel calling after her. Once she's far enough away, Penny decides the best thing to do for now is put herself out of commission until someone can find her, and so she forces herself into sleep mode and rockets towards the mountains below, where the mines from Volume 7 are located. In the distance, this falling star can be seen, which both RWBY and Yang's groups see from Mantle and the Atlas prisons respectively. To make matters worse, global comms fail shortly thereafter, and though it does cut Watts off from controlling Penny directly, it also means RWBY's message has been interrupted, and the world is likely panicking from all the confusion following the revelation of Salem. He's still able to hack into local systems, using his scroll to hack into the prison security system and opening his cell. He escapes, leaving Yang, Blake, and Jean behind while he grabs an airship from the hangar and gets the fuck out of Dodge. Over on Patch, Ty is yelling at his scroll, trying to get the connection back and crying, and Raven tells him to get a grip. Ty demands Raven portal them both to Atlas immediately to go help RWBY and Yang, but Raven says they can't. If they're going to be of any help against Salem's forces, they'll need an organized response from Vale when they're not running on fumes. Not to mention, sending Ty to Atlas ahead of time means she'll have no way back to Vale. As much as they both hate it, they're going to have to wait, but Raven promises they're going to save their kids. And also that idiot Crow, fate permitting. Back down in Mantle, RWBY is freaking out that the message has been cut off and that Penny's presumably in danger. Weiss tries to calm her down, saying they don't know if that even was Penny. In any case, she takes out her scroll and says that they have bigger problems right now. It's 11:59, and the second their scrolls hit midnight, Monstra bellows again, shaking the entire crater. It can even be felt up in Atlas. Salem's voice carries through the air. "You were warned." Right as she says that, the Grim River, which had been slowly advancing towards Mantle, rips across the tundra within seconds, beginning to flood the city. Grim charge from the mountains and sky, not to mention all the Grim currently leaping from the river. They have no idea whether the hard light barriers around the crater will hold, but RWBY and the others know they can't just sit here. They have a city to protect. Mantle is overrun with Grim, and RWBY, Weiss, and the Happy Huntresses are doing their best to keep them away from the hard light dust barrier protecting the people in the crater. The Happy Huntresses have themselves spread out in pairs, with Fiona and Joanna on the east side and Robin and May on the west. RWBY and Weiss are in the center of the city. Salem, meanwhile, is overseeing the invasion from the bridge, orchestrating the movement of the Grim River and her hordes like a maestro. Tyrion apologizes for interrupting, but he brings news that it seems Cinder has run off. Salem knows this, but couldn't care less at the moment. Cinder handled herself after failing at Haven, and she can handle herself now. Worst case scenario, Salem will need a new vessel for the Maiden powers, but that can be addressed after her victory here. Meanwhile, an unconscious Cinder hears bits of what Salem and Watts said to her about her being a failure. A new voice, that of an older woman, tells Cinder that she's nothing, that she's a weak little runt, who this woman only cares for out of pity, and that without her, she'd be out on the streets starving and begging for scraps. Emerald's voice breaks through and Cinder finally awakens, finding herself in the middle of the mountains outside Mantle and still without her grim arm. Emerald helps her sit up as Neo stands nearby with the airship. Cinder asks where Penny went, but Emerald doesn't know, as she was so focused on finding Cinder, she hadn't seen what happened back at Amity. She tries to get Cinder up to take her back to Monstra, but Cinder retaliates and pushes her away. Cinder refuses to give up until she has both the Winter Maiden power and Ruby's head on a platter. Emerald insists they go back so Cinder can rest given how badly hurt she is, but Cinder keeps refusing, telling Emerald she doesn't know what she's talking about. When Emerald tries grabbing Cinder, Cinder flips out and her grim arm grows back immediately as Cinder instinctively uses it to slash at Emerald, knocking her back and sending her nearly tumbling off a nearby cliff. Emerald just barely grabs onto the ledge as the cold wind lashes at her face. She cries out, apologizing to Cinder, begging for help and saying she just wants to see Cinder succeed. And when she still gets no answer, she screams, "I love you." That's why she's so devoted to Cinder. That's why she helped her defy Salem, why she believed she was alive after Haven, and why she stayed with her after Ruby injured her at Beacon. Emerald says she would do anything for Cinder, and she'll happily help her find Ruby and Penny if she'll still have her. It's silent for a bit, but then laughter. Cinder approaches the ledge, looking down on Emerald with a sick grin and cackling uncontrollably. Cinder simply finds this amusing, the idea that Emerald really believed she was anything more than a tool. To Cinder, Emerald hasn't been remotely helpful since the fall of Beacon, and she was hoping that might change here. But now, Cinder views Emerald as something holding her back, and something to take pity on. She doesn't even view Emerald as worth killing. In any case, she sees the chaos over in Mantle and decides to head there, find Ruby, and kill her and her friends, and warns both Emerald and Neo to stay out of her way before taking off. Emerald is left dazed, dangling from the cliff and unsure of what to do as Cinder leaves her behind. Her grip loosens, but right as she falls, Neo grabs her hand and pulls her up. Emerald takes a moment to breathe, then motions Neo to jump into the airship. Neo tries to stop her, but Emerald pulls her arm free, saying that Cinder's just hurt because of what Watson Salem put her through, and that they have to prove themselves useful to her. Neo's clearly concerned, but feigns support as they hop into the airship and head for Mantle. As we cut back to Mantle during the Grim invasion, we also cut to Monstra, where Salem notices Cinder approaching the city. Intrigued, Salem pulls her Grim forces away from Ruby and Weiss, and as they take note, Weiss moves them both out of the way as Cinder crashes through like a comet. Cinder rushes in at Ruby. Weiss tries to help, but Cinder blasts her clear across the city, and Weiss barely manages to keep herself from falling into the Ichor. Emerald and Neo arrive in Mantle. Right away, Emerald spots Cinder attacking Ruby, but as she looks to Neo to motion her to follow, she finds that Neo has disappeared. As Emerald moves in to help Cinder, she notices Weiss running in to help Ruby, and holds her off so Cinder gets to have her rematch uninterrupted. Though Cinder is being reckless in her assault, she's also not holding back. Cinder's been suppressing her rage towards Ruby since Beacon. At that moment, Cinder had become the strongest she'd ever been, relishing in the power of the Fall Maiden, only to have Ruby steal that power from her and leave her weak and feeble. She lost her eye from the Silver Eyes, given she used a Grim parasite to take the first bit of the Maiden power, and then gave up her human arm for a Grim one to make up for how powerless she'd felt. Still, Cinder sees Ruby as a primary threat to her goals, and more than anything else, she wants to see her suffer. Cinder specifically tries to keep Ruby unable to focus on activating her Silver Eyes, namely by mentioning, Miss Nikos. Weiss, meanwhile, is actually able to keep up with Emerald. Given Emerald is so exhausted, her hallucinations are rather hazy. Emerald mentions trying to prove herself to Cinder, and Weiss tries to inquire as to Emerald's loyalties, which results in several hallucinations manifesting Emerald's memories with Cinder, similar to that Salem hallucination in Volume 5, manifesting her fear. Weiss sees Cinder's cruelty and tries to get through to Emerald, but Emerald says Weiss couldn't possibly understand what she's gone through. This escalates into a full-on breakdown for Emerald, where a massive hallucination forms all around her and Weiss of Emerald back on the mountain cliffside from earlier in the chapter. But this time, there are flames beneath Emerald, and Cinder actually stomps on Emerald's hand and sends her into a freefall. Weiss leaps forth and holds on to Emerald, and the hallucination breaks apart as Weiss holds onto Emerald in reality. Teary-eyed, Emerald asks why Weiss saved her, and Weiss says she knows what it's like for someone you love to toss you away the moment they can't exploit you anymore. She tells Emerald she deserves better than the hand she's been dealt. Emerald says with all that she's done, with how she helped in Penny's initial demise and the fall of Beacon, she doesn't know how she could ever make up for all of that. To which Weiss says she can start by helping them save Mantle and Atlas. Cutting back to Cinder, the truth starts playing to the fight. Now, there are a lot of problems with this song, not only the weak on-the-nose lyrics, but even the fact it uses Roman's leitmotif rather than Cinder's. This song would need to be completely reworked into a full-on ballad that actually works for Cinder's worldview. What would that look like? No clue, but using Cinder's leitmotif with better lyrics would most certainly be appreciated. You know, the one that goes da na na na. You know, like All Things Must Die, there's that. Cinder manages to corner Ruby, only for Weiss to get in the way and knock Cinder aside. Cinder's surprised Weiss is still alive, but creating a javelin, she promises not to miss any vital organs this time. Weiss dodges and manages to get out of Cinder's line of sight, and when Cinder looks back to attack Ruby, she finds she's missing. She looks again, then spots Ruby and Weiss running away in the distance. She lets forth a plume of flames, though once the flames stop, she finds nothing left behind. Confused, Cinder looks around, then spots Emerald using her hallucinations. Cinder scoffs and admits she's impressed Emerald is still alive too, but she'll fix that. Here, we get a brief clash between the two, but Emerald's still too exhausted to fully match up to Cinder. At the very least, she does manage to break Cinder's aura, albeit with hers being broken as well. Weiss rushes in to save her, and before Cinder gets chase, she spots Ruby presumably trying to activate her silver eyes on another building. Unfortunately, Cinder flies at Ruby before she can use her power, but in a flash of pink light, the revealed Neo dodges Cinder's attack, then stabs Cinder with the needle in her parasol, quite literally in the back. Cinder takes a moment to try and recover, but is further dazed as Ruby creates a rose petal tornado to toss her into the air. Cinder tries to reorient herself, only for Weiss to release a flurry of Nevermore summons to hold Cinder off. Right as Cinder destroys them all, Emerald's weapon wraps around her, and with Weiss' glyph giving her some leverage, she swings, throwing Cinder right into the Grim Pool. Cinder screams in pain, trying to pull herself out, only for Apathy arms to grab her and pull her in completely. Ruby, Weiss, Emerald, and Neo watch the Ichor in silence, waiting for Cinder to come back up. But she doesn't. Salem sees this from the bridge, looking on in disappointment, but decides she can handle this. The Grimm have stopped their attack, and the crater barrier is intact, but Mantle is left in ruins. The Ichor has fully swept through the entire city, most buildings submerged with only a few rooftops barely peeking out. Emerald drops to her knees and cries, and Ruby and Weiss hold on to her, and Neo stands beside them. They're not sure what to say, but before they even get a chance, Monstra bellows again, and Salem's voice projects everywhere. Poor Mantle, always left out in the cold. I'm disappointed, James, but honestly, unsurprised. Congratulations to those who found shelter in the crater, but I doubt even that barrier will be able to hold the weight of Atlas when it crashes upon your heads this morning. That fate can still be avoided, however, if only your so-called guardians would comply with my simple requests. I expect the Winter Maiden and the Staff of Creation before sunrise. And to Ruby Rose specifically, I know more than anything else you want to keep the people safe, and the best way to do that is to simply hand yourself over. It's what Summer would have done after all. Do try to get some rest, Atlas. You're going to need it if you continue this foolishness. We begin with a bird's eye view of the Grim River having flooded all of Mantle. With the hardlight barrier around the crater still intact, we get some close-ups of submerged buildings, with Grim occasionally rising up from the Ichor, including Flying Grim sitting atop the barrier almost as if waiting. Inside the crater, Ruby, Weiss, Emerald, and Neo recover from their fight with Cinder, while the happy huntresses are running around, checking on everyone. Ruby tries talking to Emerald, but she remains silent, her head hung low. Robin calls out to Ruby and Weiss that they've got visitors. Leaving Neo to keep an eye on Emerald, albeit hesitantly, they're met with Pietro, Ciel, Maria, and the Schnees, who flew in on their airship from the other side of the crater away from the Grimm. Weiss asks why they're here, what happened with Amity, and where Penny is, but Ruby has this disturbed look on her face, as she already has an idea as to what's happened. Up in the Atlas military prison, meanwhile, Yang looks down at the ruined mantle, sulking, while Ironwood is trying to initiate conversation with her, Blake, and Jean. They have nothing to say to him. Had he acted sooner and not turned against them, they could have found some way to prevent all of this. Ironwood still asserts he's doing all he can, but now believes it's too late to save Mantle. He promises that when Atlas leaves Remnant, he'll ensure they're all given the choice to either stay on Atlas or stay behind and try to protect Remnant from Salem's wrath. Jean asks if Ironwood plans on telling Ren that, and Ironwood nods, mentioning that Nora is showing signs of recovery and will pull through. Over in the hospital wing, Nora awakens in a bed to find Ren at her bedside. Initially, she tries to sit up and reach out to him, but finds herself strapped down while hooked up to an IV and heart monitor. She asks where she is, and when Ren answers they're in Atlas, she pauses and asks where Jean is. Ren is hesitant, but admits he's currently being kept in the prison block along with Blake and Yang. Nora realizes what the Aesop said was true. She goes silent. Ren tries to talk to her, but Nora insists she has nothing to say to him. Ren promises that he's doing what he can to protect the people he loves. Once Ironwood finds Penny, Ren believes he can still convince Ironwood to save Mantle's citizens, which confuses Nora as to what happened to Penny. Ren mentions the Amity Tower plan failed, and Nora realizes Ren never told Ironwood that Penny had been there the whole time. Nora asks Ren what he plans on doing if Ironwood insists on leaving Remnant, and before Ren can answer, Ironwood appears at the door asking for Ren to follow him. They find Winter and the Aesops awaiting them in Ironwood's office, where Ironwood briefs them on the damages. At this point, Ironwood reluctantly admits that saving Mantle's people is a lost cause. The moment they retrieve Penny, they need to use the staff to leave Remnant immediately. He asks Ren if that's okay with him, and after a few moments of being in shock, Ren takes a breath and says, "Yes, sir." With that out of the way, Ironwood tasks Ren and the Aesops on staying behind at the academy in case Salem attacks before sunrise. Winter, meanwhile, will head to the dust mines beneath Amity where Penny fell. With her having been hacked by Watts, who's escaped, Ironwood gives Winter express permission to terminate Penny to take the Winter Maiden power for herself, which obviously unnerves everyone, and especially Winter, but Winter nods, saying she's ready to do what must be done. Back down in Mantle, everyone's been filled in on Penny having been hacked, her falling, and Cinder's demise. No one's sure what's happened to the Fall Maiden power, but at the moment, it's very far down on the list of priorities. Right now, they need to find Penny, rescue Yang and the others, and figure out how to stop Salem before sunrise without Ironwood getting in their way. It's a very tall order to fill in just a few hours, but it needs to be done. Ciel says she's going to find Penny, and once she brings her back, Pietro will remove the virus. Ruby asks if Ciel will need backup, but Ciel says that it'd be best to achieve multiple goals simultaneously. While Ciel goes to find Penny, Ruby and Weiss can figure out how to handle the Atlas situation. She heads off, and Ruby's still clearly concerned about Penny. Weiss suggests that if they're going to take the fight to Salem, it would be best to make sure they get as many innocents out of the way as possible beforehand. The only issue is that with thousands already cramped within the crater, they have no real way to reach the tundra. Not that they'd survive long out there with the cold and grim. The only option they have is to head deeper underground, which essentially would be preemptively burying themselves. Jacques actually has an idea, using one of the SDC freighters to fly down to Mantle, then fly its people somewhere safe. Everyone's kinda surprised Jacques, of all people, actually came up with an idea to help, especially given all the people here are, well, ones he exploited. Especially given everyone down here isn't exactly excited to welcome the Schnees. Whitley says that one freighter couldn't possibly carry all of Mantle's citizens to safety, but Weiss starts to have an idea. Although that gets interrupted right as a familiar voice calls out for her, and Weiss' face lights up. Klein was escorted to the crater earlier that day, and he'd been hoping to run into Weiss given all the news coverage he'd seen throughout all of this chaos. Whitley is a bit awkward, but Klein hugs him as well, happy to see that he's safe. Though he's definitely less happy to see Willow, and especially Jacques. While Weiss and her family hammer out their plan with Pietro's insight, Ruby decides to go check on Emerald. Emerald is still a mess from everything that's happened. Ruby's not sure what to say, but decides to ask Neo why she helped them against Cinder. Using her illusions, Neo indicates her wanting to avenge Roman by killing Cinder. She pretended Ruby was her target in order to string Cinder along until she got an opening. And as much as Neo may dislike Ruby, she still wants Salem gone too, given she's the one who instructed Cinder to manipulate Torchwick in the first place. Emerald finally breaks her silence, admitting her envy that Neo still has some kind of direction. After realizing Cinder never even cared about her, and with her now gone, Emerald feels at a loss of where to go. Weiss told her she could start by helping Ruby and her friends save Atlas and Mantle, but Emerald isn't sure whether they'd even want her around with all she's done. Ruby admits that she isn't so sure she can forgive Emerald, but she also knows that they're going to need all the help they can get. They can put their demons to rest once they've taken Salem down. Besides, once Penny's back, then Emerald can apologize to her directly. Tearing up a bit, Emerald nods in agreement. Right then, Pietro says he's not so sure on trusting these two given they helped the assault on Amity, but he's willing to trust Ruby's judgment. Weiss explains the plan. All of them will head up to Schnee Manor so that Jacques and Pietro can order the SDC's automated drones to pilot all their freighters, which are currently sitting empty in the company hangar due to the embargo, to head down to Mantle and take all of its people somewhere safe. And Weiss suggests Argus, given it's the closest. Once they're dropped off, Ruby, Weiss, Emerald, and Neo can sneak into the military compound, break Yang's group out, and then head out to fight Salem head-on. The mention of fighting Salem has everybody a bit wary, but it's better than nothing. Ruby agrees to the plan, as do the Happy Huntresses, though they're going to stay down here in the crater to make sure no Grimm get past the barriers. With that, everyone heads out. We cut back to the military prison, where everyone is awkwardly silent in their cells. Breaking that silence, Jean asks if the others think Ruby and Weiss are okay down in Mantle. Yang doesn't answer, but Blake says that Ruby's always been able to hold her own, and Weiss is always there to bail her out when she gets in over her head. She's sure they're safe and sound in the crater, and Yang quietly agrees. Jean asks if Yang is okay, but she again refuses to answer. It's clear something is on her mind, and Jean tells both her and Blake that if they have anything to say, it's best to say it aloud, however messy it may be. After all, you never know when you'll lose the person you care for most and leave everything unsaid. He knows from experience. When it becomes clear Yang isn't talking, Blake decides to take Jean's advice. After she left Adam, she was too ashamed to go back to her parents. Instead, she decided to become a huntress and find a way to fight for Faunus rights outside the White Fang. But really, she was lost with nowhere to go, and Beacon was a chance to start fresh and find herself again after losing that sense of self in her relationship with Adam, and she never expected to find her new family in Team RWBY. But when the fall of Beacon happened, Adam told her that he would make it his mission to destroy everything she loved. That was right before Yang lost her arm trying to save Blake. She blamed herself for what happened and feared that if she stayed around, Adam would track her down and finish the both of them off, and maybe even Ruby and Weiss along with them. Without any idea of where to go, she ran, believing they were better off without her. She's not sure why she ran back to her parents after all that time. She told Sun it was for closure, but she's still not sure whether that was the truth. But all that time having Sun talk sense into her and helping Ilya and clearing the air with her parents, Blake finally felt like herself again, but stronger. By the time she'd helped save Haven, she felt as though fate had reunited her with Team RWBY to continue that healing. But she was never able to level with any of them about what happened, especially Yang. After they were forced to kill Adam, Blake's old habit of blaming herself came back with a vengeance, and now with everything in tatters, she has no idea if there's any purpose to what's happened, and she feels herself to be more of a burden in their fight against Salem than anything else. She actually connects a lot to Ozpin in the fact that he helped Salem build a kingdom built on war and blood, only to be betrayed by the one he loved when he tried to do the right thing, followed by eons of running from the truth before realizing what he had to do. And in that, Blake wondered if part of the reason Yang was so infuriated with Ozpin was because it reminded her of what happened between them. Yang is still quiet, but when Blake nearly gives up on waiting for a response, she says, "I love you." Both Blake and Jean are caught off guard, but Yang elaborates. She'd always had feelings for Blake and wanted to help her come out of her shell and support her. But when Blake ran away without any explanation, Yang was confused. When she was little, her own mother had left shortly after giving birth to her. Her father was never really around, and she and Ruby's mother died on a mission not long after. She'd gotten used to people leaving without an answer a long time ago, so in a way, she felt like she shouldn't have been surprised. It was the lack of a reason that made it so difficult. Yang was left to wonder why Blake had vanished. Maybe she decided to find Adam and take him down on her own, which itself would have hurt, but worse than that, maybe Blake just never cared about Yang in the first place and thought she was dead weight. Weiss helped her through some of it when they reunited in Mistral. Once Blake had returned, Yang was so happy just to see her and have her back on the team, she didn't feel the need to ask questions. And once they defeated Adam, she thought maybe this might set Blake free at last. But it didn't. The fact they've never really talked about how they felt and just let things go assumed for such long periods of time makes Yang wonder if the two of them are even friends, let alone whether they could be anything more. Whether she actually loved Blake, or it was the idea of her she became infatuated with, letting herself get her hopes up time and time again, just for them to be broken over and over. And after your heart's been shattered a few times, you get tired of trying to put the pieces back together, when they just keep getting smaller and more chipped. Raven's voice echoes through the room. Truth hurts, doesn't it? She appears through a portal, and Yang is immediately pissed given she told Raven she doesn't need her help. Raven says she wanted to at least check in on her, then introduces herself to Blake, already knowing she's Yang's infamous partner. Jean's a bit annoyed he's being ignored, but Raven tells him to stuff it. In any case, Raven's certain that inside her cell, Yang should be out of harm's way for the time being. And though she said she doesn't want to help, Raven does say she'll be back with some soon. Whether their goal will be to take down Salem or just escape to buy themselves time is still up in the air, but Raven does want to help in some way to make up for what she's done, and Blake nods while Yang just ignores her before Raven leaves. Over on Monstro, Hazel is out on the hangar staring at Atlas and Mantle in the distance with regret. Oscar asks if Hazel minds him joining, and Hazel says, so long as Ozpin isn't here, fine. Oscar tries to make conversation about Gretchen and what their lives were like before she died. The two of them lived in Vale, their parents having attended Beacon but died out in the field. It was for this reason Hazel was already skeptical of the Huntsman Academies, but he acquiesced when Gretchen wanted to study to become a huntress, as she wanted to follow in their parents' footsteps and protect people from the Grim. For a while, things were fine. Gretchen had even been named leader of her own team, but it was towards the end of her final year, right before graduation, when he got the news that Gretchen and her team had been killed on a training mission sanctioned by Ozpin directly. But that was when Hazel remembered some odd things Gretchen had mentioned leading up to this, namely about some looming threat Oz had kept alluding to, almost as if he wanted something from her specifically. Reluctantly, Oscar mentally asks Ozpin what he's talking about, and Ozpin replies, she had silver eyes. Oscar asks if Hazel really believes Salem will reunite the two of them, and Hazel says yes. He's willing to do whatever it takes to be reunited with her, even destroy their current world, not that there's much in it worth saving. Oscar tries to mention the staff's limitations, but immediately the Hound grabs him by the arm and throws him into the wall. Salem has taken note of Oscar's scheming, and laments how it seems he's already inherited Ozpin's manipulative tendencies, to which Oscar says Salem is one to talk. Salem says she at least plans to follow through on giving her followers what they want, whereas Ozpin just lets his followers die for nothing, which she finds interesting as a red-eyed crow flies around behind her. She turns to blast it out of the air, and Crow dodges, shifting into human form and charging at Salem. The Hound blocks him, and Crow jumps back. Before Oscar can do anything, Salem summons several grim hands to hold him back and cover his mouth. Mercury and Tyrion hear the commotion and arrive, but Salem motions her followers to stay back. She welcomes Crow, saying she's been hoping to meet one of Oz's most devoted disciples for a long time now, especially ever since his team leader paid her a visit long ago. Crow isn't interested in Salem's mind games. Crow tries to put up a fight, and for a bit he does hold his own as a skilled pro huntsman, but Salem's combined magic and immortality allows her to keep coming back and wear him down. His bad luck semblance also doesn't do him much good, as Salem heals what would be a fatal wound for any mortal, and simply says, "I've had worse days." It doesn't take long after that for Salem to defeat Crow, knocking him unconscious. She orders Hazel, Tyrion, and Mercury to escort them to separate chambers for the remainder of their siege, saying that they'll serve as further incentive for when RWBY arrives. And to speed that along, she has the Hound sniff Crow, then orders it to bring RWBY back to her. The Hound pauses before heading off, glancing over at Hazel for a bit as it whimpers, but as the other villains tell Hazel to hurry up and help them with their prisoners, the Hound sprouts its wings and flies off towards Atlas. So, yeah. I hope you enjoyed the first part of my Volume 8 rewrite, and if you did and you're excited for Part 2, then make sure to subscribe and ring that bell for notifications to stay informed of when it's coming, because YouTube hates creators. And if you would like to support myself and the channel, then you can pledge your support over on Patreon, as well as pre-order Disaneribus from the Ashes over on Amazon, or wherever else you get your books. I'm the Unicorn of War, and right now all the characters' stability is a shit show. God help them all. I'm listening to Golden Girls right now in the background, and Rose just said 1 out of 3 people will get cancer, but I was speaking during it, so I heard canceled. 1 out of every 3 people will get canceled. I'm sure something in this will get me canceled.